This is the revised one. I don't have it. Sure. You have one? Yeah, that'd be great. No, thanks. Thank you. No, I have it on here, but it's good.
No, this is, I don't.
We've already reviewed this.
That's all.
So one.
Vice Chairman, I just want to say, wonderful. With the rest of the- What a great person.
Yeah, we're-
Welcome back.
Thank you. I had a wonderful supporting staff. You guys sound like politicians. Wait a minute, I left my boots.
Yeah, we can cut it if we need to.
I understand you have some things to speak about.
Well, I did request the house on the Global Cell stop at 3. Updated this morning. If time on this.
Just land use.
Came with that pack.
Okay. Maybe it wasn't, maybe I didn't leave it on. We up and running?
Yes, we are.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. And this is a regular meeting of the Allendale Land Use Board at which formal action will be taken on the items listed on the agenda and upon any other matters which may properly come before the Land Use Board. Requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been satisfied through posting on the public bulletin board in the municipal building and the borough website and by publication in the record on January 31, 2022. Copies being sent to the Ridgewood News. Certain agenda items will be open to the public for comment or testimony, and the board will advise the public when such matters are open for comment or testimony. I'll just ask if you can join me in a pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Have a roll call, please.
Board Member Bergen is absent. Secretary Delavatio is absent. Board Member Davis. Here. Board Member Kistner.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Lovasolo is absent. Board Member Yakarino.
Here.
Vice Chairman Sirico.
Here.
Mayor Bernstein is absent. Chairman Quinn.
Here.
Alternate Forbes.
Here.
Alternate Petrino.
Here.
Thank you. Sounds like we have a full complement of the board. I know Joe just dropped a letter late this afternoon saying he was feeling ill, so he was not going to be here tonight. So we do have 7 voting members. Right. Yes, we're good. Okay, so this is a continuation of the meeting from March, I guess it was 18. 14, application file, Land Use Board 2022-02, applicant ABC Vault Partners, address 222 Maple Street, Allendale, New Jersey, block 1808, lot 2. And it's proposed 2-story apartment building with 4 units. So we'll continue. Sir,
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Kevin Kelly, Kelly Murata Tuckman on behalf of the applicant. It's good to be back before you again this evening. Want to start in advance by thanking you for your attention and going late, pretty late at the last meeting. We don't anticipate being that late this evening. I have all my witnesses back again this evening, but 2 of which will be limited in testimony just to address commentary from the board. But what I'd like to do with the board's permission is call my planner first, because she has a conflict and has to be before another board meeting at the same time as this one.
okay,
I think we could address that testimony. It's somewhat technical. I'm sure the board's heard many planners, but we can go through that. Then I'll have my traffic expert prepared to address some of the questions the board had raised at the last meeting. And then I brought Ms. Osterkorn back to address the various changes that were discussed that have been implemented in the plan. And I'll finish up with Mr. Scrub.
okay. So we'll circle back to the engineer's report.
Yes, sir.
Is that basically, that was the homework assignment, I guess, after the
Yes.
last meeting?
And I can go right into that after the planner. I would just like to get the planner on. her way,
Yeah,
so I don't
okay, I appreciate that. We okay with that? for a
Yeah,
sec?
that's fine.
Okay.
So why don't we do that? If you want me to then make sure I did my homework, I'm
Right.
happy to jump into it.
Okay,
All right, I'd like to call Catherine Gregory as my planner.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth through the course of this application.
Yes, I do.
Okay, Ms. Gregory, can you just give the board the benefit of your educational background, work history?
Yes, I'm the principal of Gregory Associates located in Fort Lee, New Jersey. I have a Master of Urban Planning and a Master of Architecture from the University of Illinois that I received a long time ago. I've been a professional planner since the year 2000. I've testified before boards throughout the state of New Jersey in my last 22 years as a tenured licensed planner. I have been in Allendale, but I haven't been here in a little while. And if you have any more questions about my credentials, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And you're a licensed professional planner in good stuff.
Yes, my license is due for renewal next month, actually.
So we got you in under the wire. There's no
Yes,
problem.
no, it's never lapsed.
Okay. I'd offer Ms. Gregory as a planning expert, Mr. Chair.
okay, welcome back. We accept.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Gregory, you were retained in connection with this application by the applicant, correct?
Yes.
And what did you do in connection with your being retained?
I reviewed all the application materials that are submitted to you through the various revisions that include site plans, architectural plans, and all the other application materials, as well as any departmental reports, engineering reviews, planning reviews. I've also done several site inspections, and I was here at the last meeting, hearing all the testimony, or listening to the testimony that was provided by the applicant's professionals.
Okay, you've had the opportunity.
Oh,
to
I'm
speak-
sorry, and the master plan is on the ordinance.
You've had the opportunity to speak with the applicant professionals.
Yes, of course.
Right, you're familiar with the master plan and the zoning ordinance.
Yes.
And can you share with the board what variances we require in connection with this application?
Certainly. First and foremost, tonight we are seeking a D1 or a use variance for a use that's not permitted in the zone. We're proposing a multifamily residential use, albeit residential is permitted in the district, but not the way we are proposing it. We could have retail on the first floor and apartments above, or we could have a single or two family on the site, but we are not permitted to have a multifamily in the C1 central, the C1 business district. So we are seeking a use variance. There's 2 prongs to the criteria for the use variance. There's a positive and negative. In terms of the positive criteria, there's also 2 parts to that. We have to prove that the site is particularly suited or that the use is inherently beneficial. Obviously, we're not claiming that, but so we are proposing that the site is particularly suitable to the use. We also have to advance the purposes of the municipal land use law under the purview of the special reasons. In terms of the negative criteria, we have to show, excuse me, I'm talking so fast, that there's no substantial detriment to the public good, and no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of your zone plan and zoning ordinance. Now, with that said, I think that the site is particularly suitable for a number of reasons. While it is located in the C1 Central Business District, it is actually separated from the other buildings on Allendale Avenue. And I think you're well aware that all the buildings that face Allendale Avenue have parking in the rear. We have a parking lot that's actually next to us. So we have frontage on Maple Street. We don't have direct access to Allendale. So I think that's kind of integral to our application. I don't think that it would make any sense to have a business that's not on Allendale. There would be a lot of foot traffic. People wouldn't necessarily know it was there, unless it was something like a destination. And I know that the applicant talked about how he was trying to look for some type of use for the property, commercial use, and no one was interested. If it was a Starbucks, like people would know where it is and they have their cravings for their coffee and they would go. But the site cannot handle a retail use. What's there now is a defunct bank drive-through, correct? So really, that's a very small commercial use. And unless there's a very small commercial use on the property, which really isn't necessarily feasible because we're talking about redevelopment of a site, which means you got to knock down that brick building. That's really not palatable for providing a very small retail use, or in essence, honestly, providing your 1 or 2 family. The cost basis, and I know that economics is not something you're supposed to consider, but we have to kind of look at the reality of the situation. And the fact is there is a commercial structure there, and it's going to take some money to knock it down to build anything on that site. Because a drive-through is a very specific type of use, and it's not necessarily easily adaptable to other uses because of the way that it's structured. So, with that said, also the architect talked about the fact, and this is kind of goes to hardship too. He talked about all the iterations of having retail on the site, retail and having residential. And the fact is it doesn't really support the parking that we need for those types of uses. And while obviously maybe a 2-family could be built on the site, I don't think it's reasonably adapted to that because I just don't think it's economically feasible. So, part of the deposit criteria is that we have to show that we are particularly suited. We have to show that it can't be reasonably adapted. And I think we kind of fit into both, to be honest with you. And there's not too many applications I can actually say that. Also, with that said, we are located, I'll hand these out. I think you all well know that the site is actually a 3-minute walking distance from the New Jersey Transit station. And you know that basically planning tenants tell us that we like to have transit-oriented development, right? So I think that the site is particularly suited because now you're going to have more residents that are going to be walking to New Jersey Transit, and also more residents that are going to actually utilize your downtown, which I know was a concern in the master plan, the vitality of the business district, the central business district. So on the opposite end, instead of providing another retail, providing more people to actually use what's already there. I got a little ahead of myself because I really did want to hand this out. I apologize. So I would probably like to mark it.
We're at A6.
It is A6.
A6.
And what is this document?
Okay. Simply, it is an aerial photograph that I took from Bing Maps. And you know how you can go in and you can utilize directions. So what it is, it shows the pathway basically to the Allendale train
So this is
station.
entitled Existing conditions and pathway to the transit station.
Yes, that is
Correct.
that is correct. So it has one aerial photograph on it and the pathway, which shows a 3-minute walking distance. It's a pretty simple diagram, so I think it's self-explanatory, but I just wanted to show the board that the distance is pretty small. I'm sure that you're well aware, but now we actually have it in photographic form. Going through some of more of the particularly suitable reasons. Truly, I know this was brought up at the last hearing. This does really act like a transitional use, kind of a transitional buffer to the single and two family homes that are located in the B zone past this particular piece of property. I would advocate to say that the neighbors would probably want this use versus having a retail use and or retail and residential use next to the property because it's fully residential. So the hours will be the same. The difference is people who usually, live in apartments, they're a little bit more used to, if you want to say, maybe more noise, more activity, because there is going to be a parking lot next door. And again, I go to the feasibility. I don't know how many people would build a two-family home next to a commercial parking lot. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, and we know it exists in New Jersey, but I don't know that anyone would actually build that. So we're talking again to the feasibility of what you can build on this site. And I think it should be noted that the applicant would not be here if he had found a commercial use that would go on this site. I think that's important to note. So in terms of the special reasons, that would be promotion of the purposes of the municipal land use law. I do believe we promote purpose A, which talks about promotion of the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. And I think that we can all agree that we're going to take basically a defunct vacant site that doesn't look so hot right now, and we're going to provide what looks like a residential use. It's residential architecture. I think the architect did a great job of trying to reflect the architecture of residential in the neighborhood. So I think that we do promote purpose A. That also would be promoting purpose I, which talks about a desirable visual environment in terms of more landscaping and also the type of architecture that we're proposing. I believe that there is adequate light, air, and open space, even with the variances proposed, and I'll get to the rear yard setback in a moment. Also purpose G, which talks about providing sufficient space and appropriate locations for a variety of uses, which does include residential, in order to meet the needs of all New Jersey citizens. So I think that everyone's fully aware about the housing crisis that we're kind of having today. Not only do we have inflation, but housing prices are kind of going crazy. And the reason is really supply and demand. Freddie Mac did a study in May of 2021 that found that the US is short 3.8 million housing units. And I'm pretty sure we haven't built them in the last year. So there is absolutely a need for more units. And I'm not saying that Allendale has to have them all. So basically what we're talking about is an increase of 2 units over what would actually be permitted in a two-family. And I don't think that that is very substantial, given the fact that there really is a need. And the fact that single-family homes, the pricing, anyone entering the market, they just can't afford them anymore. So they need a place to go. And this would be a place that they would be able to go. A 2-bedroom apartment located next to downtown. I don't have to drive. I take the train and I have this downtown that I can utilize for all my daily needs. Excuse me. So I think that we do promote several purposes of the municipal land use law. Now I'm going to talk about the C variance that we need. We need one for the rear yard setback. I believe that this is a C1, again, in case of hardship, because of an exceptional situation uniquely, affecting a specific piece of property. So I'm going to actually go to plans. And, so
The new plans.
yes,
These are what was revised.
these are revised plans.
I will have them identified. Okay, two.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I know they're not hers, but
Describe the revision date.
Actually, it's up here. The revision date is 3/14/22. Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that she was?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the next one. I'm sorry, 4/8. I thought it was consistent throughout. I apologize about that. Yeah, sheet 3 is the site plan. So actually, you know what? I'll use this one first. The rear yard setback that's required is 24 feet. When it abuts the residential district, there's no requirement that actually abuts the C1 zone. So what I'm showing here, or actually what the plan shows, excuse me, there's 9.1 to the rear of this property. Well, we got 2 things going on. Number one, This lot back here has this little weird leg in it. I have no idea why, but this is effectively dead space. This is open space. There's no buildings here. It's not occupied. So number one, we kind of have the technical variance. And then number two, what I would also advocate is that engineer graciously outlined the zoning line on the zoning map here. And what I wanted to tell you is that when you take a look at this, right, if you look at sheet 2 and you take a look at where that zoning line is, that variance is actually to that little weird flag piece, which is technically in the C1 zone. It's not even in the residential zone. So if I say that we have a technical variance of this 9.1 feet, I mean, this would definitely be it. I think that it's absolutely warranted to grant this variance because it goes back to this weird part of the lot, which is effectively open space and can't really be utilized by any kind of structures in this area, really, without meeting the proper setbacks and the like, because it's so small. It's just this like weird little piece that comes out from the neighboring property, which is in the residential zone. So I think that, like I said, a technical variance, I think at best. And
Can I just ask, so that weird piece really is owned by the residential
yes, it's
owner,
part of
not the
this.
commercial owners
And
on
this is
Allendale?
basically right here coming down. So this cuts off this entire piece. This is in the C1 zone.
Right, that's,
This
okay.
is in the residential zone.
Yeah.
And then it comes down and it jogs around our property and then back on Maple to about 3/4 of where the building is and then comes down like that. So
Okay.
it's kind of very unique in this situation. So I think that it is warranted to be granted. Okay. We have eliminated the parking space variance. We have provided 8 spaces. I will let the architect talk about the specifics of that, but we no longer need that variance. So we're
Okay.
talking about a use variance and a rear yard setback variance. So I'll get to the negative criteria. In terms of the negative criteria, I don't believe there's any substantial detriment to the public good. We are eliminating what is kind of an eyesore today. We are creating more eyes on the street and more people to utilize the downtown. I think that we're providing a great transitional use from the single and 2 families to the basically the parking lot that's located behind the commercial buildings in the downtown. And I believe that there's no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of your zone plan and zoning ordinance. I know that Mr. Sykes talked about the master plan in his review letter. And he had claimed that the use would be inconsistent with the underlying purpose of the zone. But I don't think that it's inconsistent in the fact that we have a very unique site, a very unique condition. Had this property been on Allendale Road, yeah, guess what? I would say we are flying in the face of what the purpose of the district is. But effectively, we're kind of in I don't want to say no man's land, but that's where I get to the transitional part of that. We only have that access on Maple. We only have frontage on Maple. We do not have frontage on Allendale. I could not stand here today and tell you, yeah, I think it's great to build a multifamily building where you have all these nice storefronts. This is a completely different situation. So I think that we don't really fly in the face of that based on this very specific piece of property. And like I said before, in terms of the master plan, if you're talking about the master plan, the vitality of the central business district was an issue. And I think that trying to add a retail use, which really isn't palatable at the site, or feasible rather, I think it's better to add a few more eyes on the street and a few more people that are going to utilize that downtown. Because I'm certainly just going to walk around the corner down to get my coffee rather than get in my car and go somewhere else. And obviously we have a shopping center that has a supermarket. So to provide more people to utilize all the small businesses and everything else that's down there, I think that it really is a better planning alternative. I'd like to review the goals and objectives of the master plan because I think that we do promote a few of those. Goal number 3 talks about maintaining and enhancing the viability of the central business district. And, I have to talk about this because basically we're in the central business district technically. But it does talk about encouraging an appropriate mix of land uses that will complement one another. And I do believe that this land use will complement the central business district for the reasons that I've stated. I also believe it will promote goal 3B, which talks about promoting a desirable visual environment. I think that again, I've talked about that as well. Goal number 8B is to promote the efficient use and development of land. I believe that we are doing that as well. And then there's also goals that were identified in the 2011 master plan reexamination. And what was interesting about one of the goals there, it talked about preserving and enhancing the suburban character of the existing 1- and 2-family residential neighborhoods through. And then it said establishing and maintaining transitional use zone districts between more intensive zones and residential zones. So it contemplated this whole transitional use zone. So maybe we're a mini zone. We're kind of like a transitional use, as I stated. So I think that we are actually promoting the ideals of your master plan through that particular goal. So I believe that we meet both the positive and the negative criteria for the granting of the use variance, as well as the rear yard setback variance for this application. I'm happy to take any questions.
I guess I'll turn to our planner to challenge or question that.
Does it have to be a challenge?
No, I
It
wouldn't.
could be.
It's challenges. I have some questions.
We have questions.
Sorry, testimony.
Let me rephrase. And the way this works, just for the general public, the board will ask some questions and its professionals will ask questions. Once we're satisfied that we've gotten the answers we want, then I'll open it up to the public, and the public can ask questions only on the testimony you've just heard from the planner. Okay, and then we'll do that for every new witness. And then at the end, we'll open it up for general comments from the public about this particular application. So I just want to sort of lay the ground rules of how this works. And we've done this in all our applications in front of us. So Ed, carry on.
Good evening. Good evening.
Hi.
Regarding the positive criteria, you had mentioned a number of the benefits or the purposes of zoning were further. One of them was the public health, safety, and welfare. I'm not sure you elaborated on that specific goal as to how this proposal is furthering that. Well, could you explain that more?
Sure. We actually, there's actually a case, Anfusa versus Sealy, that found that promotion of the state plan or the state goals was equivalent to promoting the public welfare. And one of the goals of the state plan, Allendale is in planning area 1. And the goal is basically for development and redevelopment to happen in areas of existing infrastructure. We have existing infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, etc. So therefore, we do promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare through the Anfusa versus Sealy case.
Thank you.
Would you agree with that, Ed, or?
Yes, I don't take any exception with that. I think that's a purpose of the state plan, as well as I know we, in fact, do recognize the purposes of zoning in our master plan as well. So if they're furthering that interest, we are consistent with that. And that's what I'm trying to tie together, is the master plan and the overall proofs that are being provided. You mentioned the Freddie Mac study that you had provided, and you had indicated a population. I think you used the word day. If you can elaborate on that a little bit further, that we're in, there's a deficiency of 3.8 million dwelling units. Of what type of dwelling units? Can you go into more detail as to that proof?
That is.
Is it just straight single-family homes? Is it apartments? Is it a mixture of types of units?
A mixture of types of units.
Okay. It comes directly from that study.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that to the board.
Yes.
I know you indicated they are in need of housing. I didn't know exactly what category.
Okay,
of
sorry
housing
if I.
we're looking at. That's okay. And then you mentioned the rear yard variance, and that's sort of a technical variance. I think your proofs were based on the fact of the alignment of the C1 zone as it currently exists. That actually bifurcates the residential property. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so therefore, you felt it was a technical variance, but yet A variance is still required, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to. I think also in your proofs, in talking about the transitional use, you said that you're in a no man's land as it relates to the C1 zone, but you're still within the C1 zone. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that statement?
Well, it kind of goes to like the transitional use aspect of this application. It's unique property because, if, like I stated earlier, what is unique about it is that we are included in the C1 zone, I think, because it was developed with this bank drive-through. And I know there was discussion at the last meeting. I don't know exactly how long it's been there. But it just seems to me that probably it might have been split lot zones if that wasn't already on there. No one had really realized because the zoning line kind of like bumps out. And so we're like kind of in a residential zone, we're kind of in the commercial zone. And so I think that's kind of where I was going with that. But like I said, I think that this is probably another two-family use next to the commercial parking lot because the buildings don't wrap around onto Maple and buffer any of the parking in the rear. So therefore, it's really just exposed. So that's where I was kind of going with the fact that we're putting no man's land, but we're kind of hovering on two zones really. That's the unique aspect of the piece of property.
Also the location within the zone itself.
Yes, because it's one of the few properties that is not does not have frontage on Allendale.
Talking about the goals in the master plan, going back to, I think in our report, I had identified that this was inconsistent with that general purpose of the overall zone that's cited in the zoning ordinance. That's one of the things under the negative criteria is that you look at the purpose of the zoning and you see whether or not there's a substantial detriment to that purpose. If you talk about how you arrive at how this is not a substantial impact to that intent and purpose of the zone.
I don't think that it's a substantial impact because it doesn't front on Allendale. And that, I think that is really a major reason. I don't think it fits the criteria for the C1 zone directly because it doesn't have frontage and it is literally buffered by a parking lot here. So it doesn't even have that seamless nature like I just talked about. If buildings had wrapped around onto Maple and then we can have a continuation, there's like a gap in between. So I don't think we're substantially impairing that because I don't think that anyone would actually realize that that is part of the C1 zone, other than I know that there's a commercial building there now, but I don't think anyone would just think like it's still part of the business district because it's really kind of separated on that.
Your basis is the location of the property.
So
compared to the rest.
the
of the
location of the property, but also the conditions surrounding it. The two things would mainly really be the fact that it does not have frontage on Allendale, and then there is buffered by a parking lot. It's not next to a building.
Separate, not
That is
necessarily.
correct.
but separate.
So if that parking lot, excuse me, for one moment, if that was more of an alleyway, would you still have the same position?
No, I mean, I don't really think so, because we could try to continue that and potentially, you know, I mean, in an ideal world, what we'd love to do is, you know, continue the streetscape and have all the parking in the back, just have, you know, an access way, but it's literally a parking lot. And as we know, parking also is at a premium, so we're kind of, we're fighting an uphill fight, right? So because we know that there's impact of parking, now we're conforming, you know, so we're not hopefully gonna have any impacts to the street parking that's already there. And so that's, oh, let me show my trap.
Because the proposal is, you know, if you're going from Allendale, you have stores, you have a parking lot, and you have another parking lot than the building.
Well, right, so, I mean, I mean, obviously, it's the best way to configure the property so that the building acts as that buffer, if you will.
Going into the residential area.
Right, and separates it from all of the parking. And I would, you know, I'd advocate to say that, you know, I think it's less intense than even the drive-through, like probably at its heyday. I mean, would you really want to live next to that? You know, people, cars always coming around, idling, and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's gonna be a building there, so I'm not gonna say we're not gonna hear anything because obviously we're all living and breathing, but you know, I think that that's gonna be a good buffer for potential like noise and cars, if you will, and or the visual aspect of it.
You had touched on goal number 3 of the master plan, and I think you appropriately addressed most of them. There's item B, which says promoting a desirable visual environment and preserving the small town atmosphere in the business district through appropriate use, bulk intensity of use, and design standards, and through streetscape improvements. How do you feel this application is further?
Okay, well, I do believe that we're improving the streetscape. We are providing a residential type of architecture that's going to face the street. Oh, and actually, you know what? I forgot about this. In my notes from the last hearing, I know that I think one of the board members mentioned the fact that the building was supposed to front on a street, meaning there's supposed to be a front door. I found nothing in the ordinance that actually says that. So I don't know if that was going to come up. Board members. I'm sorry that I didn't write down who said it, but I know that I have it in my notes. There is a front yard or yards ordinance, section 270-13, and all it talks about is that an actual lot has to have frontage, and its front lot has to face a public right of way. That's actually what the section says. And if there's another section somewhere in the entire code that says that, I did not find it. I was finding that trying to do a search, but I didn't find that. But you know, with that said, I think that this side of the building is residential in nature. So I think that it does still address the front streetscape of Midland.
I may follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Gregory, we've also stipulated that we're going to continue the streetscape coming down.
Yes.
Does that impact your opinion as to whether that promotes the streetscape?
Well, obviously, yes. Yes.
Good answer.
But I know there were more parts to that. So actually, in your report, can you just tell me which page?
Yeah, certainly. It's on page 7.
Page 7, so I can take a closer look at that. Thanks. Okay. Oh, okay. So at the top, goal number 3 is A, B, C, and D.
Correct.
Correct. Okay. All right. Well, I already talked about A, encouraging appropriate mix of land uses. I think that we are kind of helping to provide the mix of land uses, providing eyes in the street, given utilized downtown. I think we are promoting a desirable visual environment and preserving the small town atmosphere. I mean, we're talking about a 2-story building. You know, we're not talking about 5-6-story multifamily building, just a 2-story, which I think fits in with like the quaint nature of the neighborhood.
And we do have a height limitation,
Well,
so you can't put a 4-story there.
So
begin
in other
with.
words, we fit in with the character. So, providing and requiring sufficient numbers of parking and loading spaces in appropriate locations. We are certainly doing that. We're providing enough parking per our revised plan, and promoting a desirable pedestrian environment. We are completing the streetscape. We're continuing that. Obviously, we're going to have our own sidewalks on the site. So I do believe that we promote A, B, C, and D of goal 3. I'm sorry to do that in my testimony.
That's okay. I just want to make sure we touched on that. And then also under the use variance criteria, their proofs need to generate more of a substantial fact by which are reconciled, governed by, and the omission, it says, under the criteria. This is not necessarily an omission, it's a standard at which they were identifying that commercial should be on the first floor, and or it's a one or two family residential unit. You feel under your proofs that this provides more of a substantial basis for the site being particularly suited?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Okay, thanks, Ed. You talked a little bit about potentially putting a 2-family unit there, but economically it wouldn't work. But we are not to consider economics, so.
No, I know that.
So-
I understand that, but I
So
think,
elaborate on that for us.
well,
Or
I thought
2 families. I don't know if you could squeeze them in, but
you don't know if
I don't know if you could fit two families in that space, but maybe you could. Have you looked at that at all? Has anybody heard of that?
Oh, that I do not know. I thought I was talking about 1, 2, but that, I don't know. I don't remember if I have it in my notes if the architect covered that last time.
Okay, we
I
can go
don't
back
know
to
that
it
that
with
was
the
looked
engineer
at.
or the architect, but.
I'm.
But you're the one who brought up a two-family.
No, I know, because
residence, so-
technically it's permitted, but
Right.
I can't imagine somebody would knock down a commercial structure and the cost that's involved with that, so then build the two-family. Again, it kind of goes to the feasibility.
Okay, but we're not taking costs into consideration, so.
Ms. Gregory, in terms of cost, I understand, I understand the chairman's point, but in terms of feasibility for redevelopment of the site, given the location that you described, the constraints placed on the site, proximity to a parking lot right next to it, I think that promotes a realistic opportunity for development with just the two folks.
No, I don't, and I did mention that earlier in my testimony, that it would be highly unlikely that anyone would build a two-family next to a parking lot.
Why is
Because if you're building a two-family home, you want to be surrounded by other 1 and 2-family homes with side yards and rear yards and the like. And as I stated earlier, typically when you rent an apartment, you're willing to put up with more than you are when you have a single or two-family home. It's just human nature in general. I think we all agree. And like I said, if you recall in my testimony, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist anywhere in New Jersey, but it might have been like, does the car come before the horse, or you'd have to study everything. But it's probably more likely that it's residential than commercial is built next to it, because it's even just kinds of things like, if you think about the fact that, how many large old houses were converted to halls, and then there's weddings, and it's in the old residential area, and then people get all mad because then, so with that said, it's just, functionally, it's highly unlikely, just because it's not desirable for someone who would live in a 1 or 2 family to necessarily be next to a parking lot.
would this site be subdividable to provide for two families? And strength
Yeah,
of the
I would
site?
have to look at that really quickly. So I didn't really look at that. Could it be subdivided? Yeah, I would have to actually use the larger one, because I can't even read my own.
Well, that's bizarre.
Okay, great. Sorry. I have my contacts in, and it's really hard for me to read. Like, they're see far, they're not see close.
Okay.
This small print I can't read. I have to use it anyway.
Did you look at the property across the street from this property? Which is I think it's the World Ministries of some religious group or something, but at one time there were commercial enterprises in those buildings, one of which was a barber shop I frequented for many years. So that's a commercial property directly across the street.
I know. what
Have
you're
you
talking
looked at
about.
that at all?
It's kind of like, it's 1 story and it's. farther
Yes,
back in the
there, yes, and there's
property.
setback and there's a
And,
parking lot in front of it.
Right. So I'm trying to.
And I'm getting to the point that
That, well, what's interesting is if you look at the actual piece of property, I'm gonna go to the big board.
Sure.
That's actually part of a larger parcel. So it's not, that strip of buildings is not, so here's the zone line. So if I don't know, because I don't, it's not composed right now. It could potentially straddle over here, but it is actually, it's definitely part of property 2.
The C1 zone.
Correct, right. Exactly. So it's functionally part of this. It's not separate, even though I understand that there is a parking lot over here. And I don't know if it straddles into property 5 over here or not. I have to take a closer look at that. I think that that's like an anomaly, and since it's been there for years, people absolutely obviously know that it's there. But does it really? I mean, let's be honest. Does it look good? No. It doesn't really look very good. That is something obviously interesting to
Right. But the board is concerned with losing the streetscape and the downtown viability, so even though there is a slight turn there, you could put basically a commercial building on the right side and the left side, if those lower units were no longer there. So that's, I think as a board member, I'm concerned that we lose some of the street, the commercial activity. Now, I understand current economics that argues against retail stores, and we can see that on Route 17 and other places where you have a multitude of vacant buildings.
Well, like I said, the applicant did look for commercial use.
Yes, he did
for
testify
at
to
least
that.
16 months. No one wanted to go there. And I don't think there's a situation is if you build it, they will come.
Okay,
Because how many storefronts have you seen vacant? Like I said, if you look at the other side of the coin, I know you don't want to lose your business district. I totally get that. But I don't think you're going to really lose much by this parcel. This parcel is unique. And there's no other parcel in the C1 district I think I can say this about, really. It's one of the few that doesn't front on Allendale. And throughout some type of history here, somehow this separate bank drive-through got onto that
Existed,
site.
yes.
Because there was the bank at the corner. So,
Right.
and usually you want the drive-through to be at the bank, not separate from the bank anyways. I don't know the how or why of how it happened. I really don't. But like I said, the flip side of that is if you're concerned about the vitality of the business district, now you have more people that are going to use it.
okay.
I'm just gonna be honest, I've
And we
lived in
can
urban
build, yeah.
settings for all of my adult life.
Okay.
I like getting out of my car and just walking. So.
And
there's
we're trying to
lots of-
promote more of that in our master plan. That's been a consistent
Absolutely.
point of the
So,
plan, to get
Now you're
people
gonna have
out
more
moving.
people to utilize. the
Less
storefronts.
cars, more walking traffic.
I mean, I know it's not probably significantly more, but there is more that are utilize all those shops right downtown. And, Allendale Road, which I would advocate is actually a destination. So.
We know that well.
Chair?
Yes.
I just
Go
want to
ahead.
follow up on one thing that you were mentioning in your earlier questions regarding a two-family. And I was able to be reminded of this, is that actually, and I think I was swayed by your testimony saying you could build a one or two family. It's interesting, it says any use permitted in the A, AA, AAA, or B districts, provided, however, that no residential use shall be permitted below the level of the second floor in any
Right.
structure. So it's actually, it's interesting, our current code says that, okay, those uses are permitted, but it doesn't.
But it has
go on
to
the
be up
first floor.
another level.
Exactly.
I stand corrected.
So therefore, it's interesting, you probably couldn't do a one or two family without being here for a variance.
Right, for a variance anyway. Gotcha.
So really the issue at hand is the first floor going to be retail or is it going to be two residential units?
Right.
I believe that we really have provided a lot of testimony in terms of the particular suitability and really to the hardship. The hardship really being that, as I noted earlier, our applicant tried to get a commercial use on this particular site to no avail for 16 months. And how long do you expect somebody to own the property without trying to do something with it? You're paying taxes and everything else. So.
Other board members, before I open to the public, have questions? Yeah.
Question, just maybe a clarification. So I know you testified that you're seeking this rear yard because of this definitive line. Not that it would look better or it would make sense, but if you flip this and the building was on the other side, would you still need the variance?
Yeah, I mean, we still need the variance because our property does abut a residential district, albeit just not in that location.
So
That's
it
what's so
wouldn't-
interesting about it.
I'm just looking at it from the perspective of trying to eliminate it. Again, I think the way it works well, but I'm just saying if you were to
Yeah,
flip
see,
it,
like,
would
if,
it make it?
because it jogs like this, if we actually had this parcel.
I'm saying just put that building, flip the building in the parking lot just for the purposes of,
Oh, no, the variance would be worse.
it would be worse, okay?
No, it's all because of this. It's all because of this weird little
Okay.
bump out on our property.
It wasn't clear,
This-
that's what I'm just
Because
asking.
this is the.
It
this is the
abuts a
B zone.
residential.
This
Yeah.
right here is the B zone.
Mhm.
That's why we need the variance.
Gotcha.
Even though it's not here, This is at least 24 feet, but I think I reserved to 26, and obviously the engineer can correct me on that. In this location, from that point to that point, but this is where we technically need the variance. So it's an interesting nuance of this specific piece of property. So, you know, if we had the property like this, and we wanted this, and we wanted to send the building up here, like, I don't know, like, I'm not gonna say the same thing. We got a unique piece of property, and we have this weird job. It doesn't really affect anyone in this particular location. But for all intents and purposes, we meet the intent of the ordinance here, because we do have the 24 feet.
When you're saying here. just for the
Yes,
purpose of the
the
record,
residential.
Yeah.
In
Correct.
the area of the residential zone where it does jog out. and it's flat.
That is
Right.
correct. Yes.
And then just if I may follow up on Ian's question. If you were to flip that, is that a better planning alternative when you're moving a parking lot closer to single family?
Well, no, I talked about that earlier, and the fact that the building itself actually acts as a
Mhm.
buffer, which is obviously a better situation.
No,
Because
much better.
then you're
Yeah.
just like multiplying the issue that I'm already.
No, I'm only asking for the purposes of if it was a possibility to eliminate the variance, not that it would be a better option. I just wanted to clarify.
No, we it
Either way,
actually
either way, you
technically,
need it.
yeah, no, technically it might make it worse, depending
Okay.
on how, you know, how the lots could be reconfigured, so. Because there's also, you know, topography and other things that you have to be concerned about on the site. But obviously, we thought it was definitely better to have a parking lot next to a parking lot,
Correct.
And you're using the builder as the buffer going
Right,
into the
right.
residential.
as well as, you know, landscaping around.
It's given the unique characteristic of the lot where that juts out is really the only reason why you need the variance.
Right,
But if that wasn't there, then you would need the rear set yard variance.
so correct.
Other members of the board have questions? If not, I'll open it up to the public, and if you want to be recognized, you raise your hand, you come up and state your name and address for the record, and you ask questions of the witness who just presented. Ma'am?
I don't actually have a question, but is it possible to speak in the microphone? It's hard to hear back here.
Let me shut the air off.
Okay, we're gonna turn off the air.
We could hear the testimony because we could hear the chairman and we could hear the members of the board, but we can't hear this valued testimony because no one's speaking into the microphone. And I can't hear. And I think there's some-
Will you just
Isn't
tap
that
that,
micro-
see if
could
it's
you
working?
Just tap the mic.
It's not
Yeah.
working. I don't hear.
I-
I don't hear our plan, our. municipal plan.
Ed, is that working?
Yeah, they're working.
Certainly trying to address this, but we've been going
Yeah.
for
I know.
an hour, and
no,
no
no.
one's mentioned this.
We're working.
Okay,
Well, it necessitates speaking into it for it to work.
The air's off, so that should help.
thanks, Ron. We turned the air off,
You should hear
so
it
you're
now.
not getting the interference of the circulation and that noise it produces. Any members of the public wish to be heard? Or wish to,
What did you say? I didn't hear a word you said. You can't say it after an hour. It should
Right.
be- It's a little tough.
Telephone lines, what are we gonna talk about? We'll have to
Okay,
go back and see if we can-
I can't do anything about that. Had you said something earlier in the evening, we could have maybe addressed it. I don't know. But at this point, the testimony's in.
Third week is the same thing, Mr. Chairman. Third time.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, since it's my application, and I do find it a little disingenuous that they wait an hour and then say you can't hear something, but real quick, please, sir, please, sir.
My age, you can't hear, you won't hear half of what you're saying.
I'm not,
Okay?
I understand. I'm gonna make sure you hear. Can you speak into the mic?
Okay.
Can you
Hello?
hear her now? Can everybody hear her? Okay, very well. So quickly, could you just summarize your testimony for the board in terms of how this meets the positive and negative criteria for a use variance?
Summary.
Yes.
Okay.
summarize.
In terms of the positive criteria, we meet the special reasons, which are purposes of the municipal land use law, which does include promotion of the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare, also promotes a desirable visual environment. It also promotes the needs of New Jersey citizens. That's where I was talking about the fact that Freddie Mac did the study about there's 3.8 million housing units that are deficient in the United States currently. I believe the site is particularly suited due to the unique nature of the property, the location of the property. It does not have access on Allendale. It has access on Maple. It has a unique configuration. The unique configuration actually also leads to the fact that we have that rear yard setback variance, which I again also believe falls under a C1 variance or a hardship variance because of the unique shape of the site. And then in terms of the negative criteria, we have to prove no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the zone plan and zoning ordinance and no substantial impairment to the public good. I think the public good is actually served by creating this transitional use. We are providing more eyes on the street. We are redeveloping a site that it has been defunct for many years and is also currently really kind of an eyesore because it's not operational. And it also is in need of repair. In terms of the public good, we are helping to provide a need for additional housing units. We are providing more people to utilize the downtown, which also goes to the intent and purpose of the zone plan and zoning ordinance. Mr. Snikes was kind enough to ask me several questions to edify my responses. So we did talk at a farther well about the master plan and the vitality of the downtown. And I would advocate to say that we are not impeding the purpose of the zone due to the unique nature and of this property where it is located. And we had to talk about the promotion of goal 3, which included A, B, C, and D. And I know that included desirable visual environment. It talked about streetscapes. And
The streetscape being brought around.
yes, the streetscape is being brought around. So in terms of trying to, I guess, attend to the intent of the C1 zone, at least we're doing it through the streetscape because we're going to kind of bring it into the residential neighborhood. And so therefore, I believe that we meet both the positive and the negative criteria for the granting of the use variance and also the C1 or the rear yard setback variance.
Does the site adequately address any negative impact that is generated by this proposed use?
Yes, in terms of having the parking is located next to a parking lot. It's not located next to the residences. So therefore, it does act as a transitional use, acts as a buffer. We're basically the person next to us. Well, I know, I mean, they may or may not like the fact that this building is being built here. I would advocate to say that it's a less intense use than what was existing there today had it been operational with the cars, like I said earlier, coming around and idling at a drive-through. I think that that's a little bit more impactful than having a residential building next to 1 and 2 family homes that has parking on the opposite side.
Which is why you say it's a transition.
Correct.
And as a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey, do you feel that this plan adequately meets the burden of proof for this level of variance and use variance and the walk-off?
Yes, I do.
Nothing further.
Thank you. Thank you for the summary.
Thank you.
All right, before, and we'll ensure that every other witness speaks into the phone. I can hear the audible difference now, but it would have been
I don't
nice if
think they are
you brought it,
traditional
if you
health
brought it up earlier, would have been, we could have made them do that.
Well, I requested this in March when we had the first meeting about this, and I would have thought it would have been addressed by now. But everybody seems to be ignoring the fact that the people in the audience cannot hear you. We can hear you and your council people, but no one else.
Okay.
So can I
So we're
make a
not being
suggestion?
disingenuous.
Can I just make a suggestion? If this was a problem in March, perhaps maybe, okay, if it was a problem in March, perhaps maybe you guys could take a seat in the front row as opposed to the back. And I'm sure Mr. Kelly would have his professionals maybe move to one side so we could free up some seats and you guys could move to the front.
I was sitting in the front row in March.
So you decided to move a row back?
Okay,
Well, I would suggest maybe have the professionals move. We clear up some seats up front. And if you have a problem, maybe you guys move up front.
Okay,
I have nothing further.
thank you. Any questions from the public? We have one lady holding her hand up, so if you could, and another gentleman, okay? Ma'am, if you identify yourself for the record.
Hannah McMaster, 46 Maple Street.
Okay.
I heard from the council, someone mentioned,
Just in the mic.
okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, 46 Maple Street, Wahina McMaster. I heard from the council a question about the consideration of a two-family home. And I didn't hear your side of that sparked that question, but I understood that maybe there was a consideration for a two-family home and that it was not economically feasible. Is that?
No, actually, your planner corrected me, because there's an interesting nuance to the ordinance. I'm trying to speak.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you.
While there's a pass-through in the ordinance, in the C1 zone, anything in the A, AA, and AAA, or in the B zone, which are all residential, is permitted, which would include 1 and 2 families. But then in the C1 zone, it says that you can't have any residential on the first floor. So you would actually never have a 1 or 2 family. You would have to ask for a use variance for a 1 or 2 family anyways.
So we have two-family residences on Elm Street with
It's
doors.
not in the C1 zone.
Elm Street's not a C1 zone?
To be
Okay.
B zone.
B zone.
Okay, so, and then the two-family house, like you have a two-family house on Maple Street. So yours is not, is that grandfathered in? I just wasn't sure of the difference.
No, it's in
No,
the B
it's-
zone.
It's where there's one zone ends and another one
The
begins.
other one
Our
begins.
property is exactly where the zone is. So
Okay.
our property is in the C1, and then the B is right next to us.
Yeah. Which is her
Right.
house, yeah.
And in the C1 zone, like I told you, there's like that conflicting part of the ordinance.
Okay.
So when something's prohibited, that sort of governs, which means that the pass-through is really null and void, because you can't put a 1 or 2 family there, because you can't have residential on the first floor. So that's why we're here. We're asking for multifamily use,
Right.
because we have residential units on the first.
You can
And-
put a two-family there, but you need a variance to
We
do
need a
so.
different- So,
So the board would have to prove that.
and it was, but prior to it being a drive-through, it was a two-family residence, if I understood. Single family?
Single family.
Okay. So,
That predates
Predates this.
my tenure, but that could be.
thank you.
Thank you. There was a gentleman.
Hi, good evening. My name is Spencer Roach. I live at 45 Maple, just across the street. I'm relatively new to the area. It's not really used to how this stuff works. So if I ask any stupid questions, please forgive me. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the consideration of the multifamily housing and why you thought maybe that wasn't the best option, or compared to what's being proposed,
Well, actually, we are proposing that.
or a multi, or like the 2-family home, or like a 3-family home, or something like that.
I believe the applicant addressed it first meeting, I don't know if you were here, but in addition, we would require a variance no matter what. So
Yeah, a
this is-
2-family home is not permitted. We just had that small discussion for the fact that we're not allowed to put residents on the first floor. Any residential units cannot be on the first floor. So that's why we're here. If we propose a 2-family, we'd still need a use variance. If we propose multifamily, we still need a use variance. But my testimony is that this particular use is a better transitional use than a 1 or 2-family home. Because typically, when you're in a 1 or 2-family home, you wouldn't necessarily want to build a home that is right next to a parking lot. And I also stated in my testimony that I know it exists in New Jersey, but it's not preferential.
Yeah, okay, so that's kind of what I was wondering about, because well, I understand it's not necessarily preferential to live next to a parking lot. I think there are plenty of properties that, are not necessarily in the most preferential areas. People live on busy roads, people live next to, other non-preferential type environments, but, I guess I don't really understand why that would be the consideration.
Why, what be the consideration? Multifamily?
It's been asked and answered. It's kind of an argumentative question, and I understand its position.
All right.
That's argument.
Well, I guess it could be commentary at a later time. If you had commentary that you didn't like it or something, then you can have commentary. But this is a
Right.
question period.
Yeah, like I said, I'm very new to this process.
Right.
The first time I've been here, I'm hoping to maybe get a little more information, but if that's the extent of the information you have, then I understand.
Well, this is only one witness. They have witnesses that are going to be presenting additionally as well.
And then at the end, there will be a time for public comment generally.
Right, yeah,
So,
yeah, I heard that earlier.
okay.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I thank you. Any other members of the public wish to be heard? Gentlemen over here.
Yes. For the record, my name is Anthony Caridi. I've been the resident of 34 Maple Street for 38 years. I'm intimately familiar with that street. And I would like to ask whether or not this witness is familiar with 23 Maple Street.
You'd have to tell me.
Well, 23 Maple Street is across the street from 22 Maple Street.
Maybe you could identify the
You need
property.
to
for her.
identify
This
them.
isn't like
It's a
game show.
two-family house. And it abuts a commercial parking lot that you were describing earlier when you talked about the commercial parking lot and the buildings directly across the street from 22.
Okay.
So in the same area, within feet from your property, this non-preferential use that you're talking about as being a two-family home next to a parking lot actually exists.
I already
Literally,
say it exists all over New Jersey.
well, it
Already
exists.
stated that.
It already exists directly across the street from where you're talking about, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But it already existed.
Yeah, it did. It already
You didn't have to
existed.
knock down a commercial building to build it.
No,
That
But-
would be the difference in this application.
but originally, when this was a one-family home, a
I
22
have no
Maple
knowledge
Street.
of that.
I have no further questions. Sir.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the public of this witness? All right, hearing and seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Any other final questions from the board on the witness? Ed, do you have any follow-ups at all? Okay. Okay.
Mr. Gregory, thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We had homework to do, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to call Ms. Ostakorn.
Ms. Osterkorn has already been accepted as an expert by this board and she remains under oath, so she can just go right ahead.
Can you hear me?
Ms. Ostakorn, there were a number of stipulations the applicant made last time we were here. And I understand you addressed those to the best of your ability. Is that correct?
I've addressed as many as I could to get them in the 10 days prior. Some I still requested to be if approved as a condition of approval. I wrote a response email or letter that was sent explaining most of them.
Okay. Well, with regard to the things that were asked.
Yes.
There
So,
was a question about the location of the HVAC units.
yes, we did sheet 3 that was referred to by Ms. Gregory of the set that was revised for 822. We did move the AC units to the rear of the dwelling.
Okay, so that's part of the application that was submitted to the amended plan.
Yes.
I don't know, Mr. Bott, if we need to amend those or would you, I need to. mark
Well, is
that?
that's what we marked A7 before?
Yes.
So since she prepared them, she can authenticate them and put them in, but that's
Like this
fine.
one better.
A7, revised plans, April 8th, 2022.
Yes. I also revised the exhibit, which was not provided in PDF because I just revised it today. as the last
If you can turn and face a little bit towards the audience so they can hear better.
It's revised through today, 4/20/2022. You can't see it.
So why don't we make that A8?
That's our,
No, I just want to see it.
What is that title?
What is that?
It's the aerial exhibit and rendering. I just put a revision date for today on it. I'm sorry, I didn't call me.
All right, well, why don't you come over here to the mic so we have a complete record? People can hear you and you have a pointer there.
Oh, fancy.
See that? We're high
Look
tech.
at that.
Like
All right.
Brought in talking to spare no expense.
Then ask. I put the AC units to the east of the rear of the building. They were on the side. And as part of the comments and questions, we added additional landscaping to the north of the building, the left side of the building. Should I keep going with just
Go
with the
ahead.
revisions? All right,
If you
thank you.
Testify extemporaneously, please do so.
I will continue. From my prior testimony and comments and questions from the board, it was also discussed about the parking area and trying to get 8 spaces. Originally, where this light pole and striped area was.
Mr. Chairman, would like, before he could- the seats are available in front. Yeah, I'm fine. The seats are still available in front, so if you want to move up.
Oh, I left my jacket. There was a question about the parking area and trying to get that 8th space. And there was a discussion where my pointer is, where there's the existing utility pole that we had as a dumpster area and location. When I revisited it, I was able to move the handicap parking space to that general area to have the striped area be the accessibility. And when I further looked into ADA accessibility and the need for the door to open, there is enough space from where that pole is for the side of the ADA parking space to still have that striped area be the accessible area and get out of the car. So by doing that, we were able to get the 8th space as it was recommended and looked at by the board to look at this a little bit further to have the 8 spaces required. Also,
So at this point, you meet the parking requirements.
yes, we meet the parking requirements. And as part of the questions that came up at the last meeting with respect to the dumpster area, we had talked about that it was going to be private collection and it was going to be cans, that people were going to bring out their cans. So instead of now crossing over in the back rear of the building, which I did check the architecturals to make sure it wasn't by somebody's window before I did this. There's no windows in that area for that downstairs unit. There is this space there now for the units to have as you walk out the door and go out to the west or rear of the property where there are trees, and it is testified to just kind of an open space area back there for the neighboring properties. It'll be a fenced in area that can house the garbage cans necessary for all the units. They don't have to cross over the parking area, and that it can be fit in that little back corner. With some of the other comments, we provide additional landscaping along the side in that area. I shifted the landscaping over to provide for that and shifted it to the back of the parking area. Some of the other comments that had come up were with respect to the trees of the neighbor to the north and the fence line that went along the northern property line, and the tree that's located about there, sorry for my shaky hand, as well as the tree that was on this jog corner for the property owner, the gentleman that lived on this lot. And we also looked at the cluster of trees in this back right corner, and that corner right there. And then we also went out and did additional topography for the concern of the property owner of this lot with how the curbing was going to land adjacent to the property line. So, and lastly, we did do a soil test. We went out and did a soil test and got testing results done. So with all that investigation and homework, we further looked at the fence line, which is our fence line. So now the plans are proposing to have a 5-foot fence. We are showing it around the property line to prohibit people from just walking through and coming into the property. While the tree for the gentleman on this property is right on the property line, and for the woman that is in this house that was right approximate to the property line, we are showing the fence to work around those trees with no intention of tree removal. We are going to be working with the shade tree person in town. We'll speak with the engineer and planner that if there is any reason for the trees to be removed, we will work with them to do that. But as the plan stands, we will make sure the fencing goes around those trees and keeps them. The trees that were at this corner, some of them did appear to be dead. We had a tree expert come in to look at them. We will make sure when we talk with this property owner not to impact the trees that are alive and save the trees if they can, but if they are in detriment, that they will be removed and not impacted. The soil testing that we did with the consideration and concern of the rear of the property and the drainage that was discussed, we dug down to the required 9-10 feet, did not see any signs of groundwater that was discussed of coming through the property. The soil test results did come in, which I had emailed to the engineer, and I'll just provide a copy for you now and to the board secretary.
Mark that as A9, Johnson soil test.
They came back as a K3 soil, which has a 2 to 6 inches per hour percolation rate, which is a middle range of a soil that the soil will perk within the required 72-hour period. Our plans are, as we had testified to, of being able to put an additional pit in the rear of the property to address any concerns while we do not see any groundwater back there. If there is the concern, that we can make sure we address all of any runoff from our property. From one of the comments from the engineer that was discussed about, I had a number of a grade point in this area. I re-looked at all the grading as well as taking into the additional topography that we had from the neighbor's property and adjusted the grades to basically have a high point at the entrance of the building. And I introduced a second inlet in this corner, the western corner. So now we have 2 inlets with a high point at the ridge of the entrance to the building to make sure we have our ADA access. And I adjusted all the minimal top and bottom of curb elevations to make sure everything does drain to these inlets and does not impact the neighbor's property of how it would be constructed, that it would all be and not be raising it where it just kind of flows off in the wrong way.
So we're going to address any runoff on our property, is that correct?
Yes, we are. I put a bunch of notes on the plans addressing some of the comments from the meeting about no balconies, barbecue areas or patios along the north side of the building to make sure that the impact to the neighbor to the north, there's no development or anything in this area. We added a note about garbage area to the end of the building, that being private collection. We shifted the handicap, added the additional landscaping. That was all per what I believe we captured from the board meeting from March 14th. We went through Mr. Vreeland's letter. I did address as much as I could in a short
Before you
period.
jump
Oh,
into
sorry about
his
that.
letter,
Yep,
in terms of generators, did you
Oh.
put a note on regarding generators?
I
not
did.
being permitted?
yes,
Okay. Is
somewhere I
there-
wrote that.
Is there a note about deck boxes not being outside?
Yes.
And in terms of the lighting, did you take a look at the lighting?
We added a note for the lighting to be evaluated in 6 months.
And did you review whether there's any right of way on site?
Right of way?
You're not aware of it?
Oh, no, there's no right of way on
Done the
site.
surveys and you've
Oh,
seen the
yes, saw the title. There's no right, our property line is where the right of way is of Maple Ave. There's no other additional right of ways on the property.
Okay.
With regard to the apron and sidewalk paver and the light pole that is currently in the C1 zone in terms of the streetscape, is that being pulled in front of this building to match?
Yes,
Okay, so the apron, the sidewalk paver, the light pole is going to match the downtown streetscape.
and we also noted for that tree, I think it was a comment to be removed because we were proposing additional trees.
That's my next question.
Oh, okay,
So there's-
sorry.
There's a proposal for additional trees in the right of way, is that correct?
We have them in our property, behind our property line, but it was right behind where there is a a tree grate and stuff that would be right next to our apron, that it was questionable of the proximity and taking, so we have that tree, which was also not looking the best anyway, to continue the paver sidewalk and everything. We have our trees on the property. That would be the applicant's owner's responsibility.
So we're eliminating the tree that's currently not doing too well in the sidewalk.
Yes,
And we're gonna put it back on the property and it's gonna be maintained by the owner.
yes.
The overhangs, did you address those being reflected on the plan?
Yes.
And do you have notes on the plan, or it could be the architectural plans about the building being sprinklered?
I don't believe I put that on my plan, but I think it was,
If that is a stipulation.
it is
Yeah,
a
that was a com-
stipulation.
that
It
was a
was.
commitment.
I don't think I
Board
put it.
approves, we stipulate that that is a condition.
Okay.
And discuss the 5-foot fence. So their fence is now compliant, correct? They don't need a variance.
Correct.
Can you go through the engineer's report and just address his comment?
Sure. I addressed the comments that needed commentary back. Some of them are, there was a setback discrepancy that we revised on the plan. We talked about garbage and recycling. I did state that vehicle circulation was to be provided at this meeting. Did you have that? No. Okay. Then I don't have that with me, but I can provide it. We are complying with RSIS in terms of parking spaces and required the 24-foot backup area, but I do not have an exhibit for that at this time. The proposed fencing, we're showing 6 inches from the property line with a height of 5 feet. We added a stop sign, stop bar, and the pavement markings at the entrance, which were requested. I've noted for the paver apron and a detail will be provided. I want to work with Mr. Vreeland. The paver detail I had, I didn't think was specific enough for a driveway apron. So I want to make sure it satisfies not just a paver walkway. That I talked with Mr. Vreeland about getting the exact detail the borough wants for that. We moved the 4 HVAC units to the east of the building. I have the lighting fixtures labeled on sheet 4 as requested. The roof overhangs are shown on the plan. The architectural plans will be revised to show the overall building length. I note them on my plan, and he, as a condition, would put them on his plan as well. And we had spoke to that there are no actual signs proposed for the property. It would just be the street number on the building.
What is the overall length?
Well, what? 81.4 feet from the bump out to the bump out, and taking out the bump outs on both the eastern and western side is 77.4 feet.
And those
Although
are-
the architect works in inches, I work in feet.
Okay.
Okay. Grading and stormwater. We had discussed with Mr. Vreeland about putting in pre-treatment devices at the 2 inlets, just to, while it's not required, but to address the oil and stuff from the cars would be little, they have them made for inlets as a pre-treatment before it gets into underground detention system. A maintenance plan we would put together as a condition of approval. We will provide oversight during construction. I did add to the plans the distance from the detention system to the property lines. I noted at the time of the letter that soil testing has been done. Results will be provided, which we got after my letter prior to this meeting. We noted on the plans for all gutter downspouts to be collected to the detention system. We revised the grading as necessary for no negative impacts to the neighbor. The applicant owner will maintain the underground system. The length, slope, and cleanouts and inverts, I did not have a chance to get to every detail of that if approved, I would make sure that was done to Mr. Vreeland's satisfaction of adding every invert of every clean out and downspout and length between pipes, so it was clear to the contractor. I did do inverts and pipe information on the plan. chamber detail, Mr. Vreeland asked for more specific information pending the soil results. So now that I have them, I can give specifics to the invert of the chamber, bottom of stone and top of the chamber. Now, once I do all of the other elevation and inverts as a more detailed information for the chamber system, I will revise that detail. We will evaluate an overflow to the Maple Street drainage system, which I'll do as part of when I give every detailed information for every invert specific. And the applicant owner agrees to install gutter guards around the building. For utilities, we provided the testimony regarding the HVAC units, noted that the applicant owner is responsible for on-site water and sewer. The side for the proposed water, sewer, and gas has been provided. The material, I didn't have the exact one that I thought. I was going to work with the architect and contractor and make sure we have that specific information to be provided. I will also provide the water and sewer details to the borough standards. I have our typical details, but I'm going to ask Mr. Vreeland about if there are borough specific standards, and we will provide the will serve letters for all the utilities that are currently provided onto the site and ensure that they can provide for the 4 units versus the commercial. Landscaping, we didn't have any comments.
They're going to be deer resistant.
Yes, they will be. And I'm pretty sure actually what we did was when I spoke with my landscape architect about that. The lighting, we provided some testimony on the lighting. I spoke with the lighting company. They're working with me to get a detail for the overall height. We know that it will comply with the ordinance, but to provide one detail that shows everything, I have the poles and the light fixtures separately. There will be the building mounted lights on the building as that was testified to, and we did speak to the lighting hours of operation and potential glare. And then finally, outside agency approvals will all be necessary. At this point, I believe only Soil Conservation District is required for the disturbance over 5,000 square feet. So if approved, we will apply to them for their approval. That was a lot of approves in a statement.
Okay.
There was testimony or questions posed by the public in terms of a water runoff situation on site. Did you have the opportunity on your inspection to observe that during the day right after storm?
We did go out there shortly after a storm. I know it was discussed of there being more of a river or water pattern that runs. We did not witness that. We met with the engineer out on site too. We walked the property, and given our test pit, we did a test pit in the location of the stormwater system, which is in the parking lot area. And then we did a second test pit to the rear of the property and did not see any signs of water that were running through that. But regardless of that, we have agreed to put a seepage pit back there to handle if there are any, to absorb and make sure we're capturing what is on our property.
And there's currently a curb all around the property. is there not?
Yes, there is. The curb, though, it's hard. Well, the curb that's circular right now does this in a horseshoe manner, and there is an inlet in the rear. And similar to what we're doing, our entire parking lot will be curbed with 2 inlets, and the entire roof area will all be piped to the system that we will not be generating from our impervious coverage runoff off our property.
And then the last issue was the differential between the parking lot that's immediately next to this property offsite and our parking lot.
And I do appreciate that comment that came from the neighbor, because when I relooked at the numbers, our topo was only limited to like 2 feet behind the property line. And when I went out, we extended it about 10 to 15 feet into the property. I did make adjustments to the curb lines to make sure, because where we had it would have been a problem. So I do appreciate the commentary that did happen, and we did adjust everything and lowered our inlets. And that's why we added the second inlet to have the high point in the middle of the parking lot. And we added the second one to make sure we would not impact them.
So you've addressed that concern.
I have.
I have nothing further from Ms. Osterholm, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I remember some questions about the soil stockpile. Originally shown on one of the plans as up front. Was that to be moved to the rear as well? I realize it's not going to be there post-construction, but There was some, and I believe there was some discussion about that.
We're happy to do that, whatever is recommended by the borough. Makes sense.
I just didn't want to like right on the curb line.
Oh, yeah, we can show, yeah, we can move that.
Okay.
Make sure it's not gonna run off. We'll have silt fencing, all the
Right.
requirements, and we'll locate it in an appropriate place.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll turn to our professionals what you guys were meant to walk the property. And I've heard testimony that you haven't done that, so can you talk to that or talk to the questions that were, or the state testimony we just heard?
I mean, I was out there the day that the test pits were being excavated. I wasn't there to witness the test pits, but I was in the area.
If you can speak up a little bit, Mike.
They just push it forward. Okay. I thought it was permanently there.
Well, I was out there the day that they dug the test pits and I walked the property. And I think the applicant's engineer has addressed the previous raised concerns with regard to runoff and has designed an appropriate stormwater system. And I think the testimony was that they were going to relocate the fence line to try to save the trees, which I think was one of the concerns. And it looks like, based on the observations that I made out there, that, you know, that could be accomplished.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I was not at the specific meeting of the engineers, but I did follow up and take a look at the property. I also did receive from the engineer a report from Mawa Tree Corp. I'm not sure if you're going to be submitting this as part of the record, but they did take a look at the trees on the property. They did note that one of the trees is a ash tree, a 36-inch ash. It is showing signs of distress and what they've identified as ash borer issues. So that does lead to problems for that tree. And
many trees throughout the county and the state.
In the
Yeah.
state as well. But what also I was going to ask the applicant is any of the trees that are identified on the common lot line, they seem to overlap the lot line itself, the multiple stem tree that's particularly at the end of the parking lot. You'll seek the permission to remove that tree with the neighbor.
Yes, the two trees that are on the property line.
Well, we're not intending to remove any tree we don't have. To. In the event we're forced to
Right.
because they're decrepit trees and they're danger, then we would certainly speak to the neighbor if that's going to come up. I mean, but there's no intention to take them down. That was one of the concerns, and that's why we've built the fence proposed as it is. To
Okay.
try and maintain.
Then you may need to revise your plan.
Revise
I
the
think
plan.
One of the plans show an
Yeah.
X through some of the trees.
Exactly.
So that indicates the trees are going to be removed. So I
Yes.
just wanted to
Or
make
those
sure.
ones you said
No,
that-
no, the ones that we showed to be removed were right by the parking lot area, which I think that was your question, that we would talk because they're a little bit of the overlap, which is to the rear of the parking lot. Those
They're
were
right
the,
on the lot.
yeah, those were the dead ones. The other ones that are in this corner and on this lot line, we had no intention of being removed.
Those are the ones we understood to be. a
It,
concern.
it just is a little, if I may, it just is a little confusing that you have X's through some, it says tree to be removed, and there's like multiple X's there. And then when I look at the way things are proposed, it clearly shows that there's two trees still there. So,
So there's technically 4 trees.
Okay.
It's a cluster.
It's a cluster.
all right, okay.
And it's like right on the property line. The 2 that are coming off right by were evaluated as being, but that is the property owner of, well, we would plan to talk to them because they're so close, but they are like just stubbed out. They look like they've also been cut down from the power lines or the
Yeah,
overhead wires that
they've
go
been
through
trimmed.
them. But with the proximity, there technically are 4 trees there, which is why we just show the 2.
Okay, we just want to be clear.
Yes.
Just clear for the record.
So it's
Okay.
just 2 in that cluster of 4, and that's why
Okay.
there's 2 remaining.
Okay,
Certainly talk to the neighbor. I mean, the biggest concern is if it's going to be a danger to anybody,
Right.
of course.
someone's going to have to address it. So that's our concern.
Thank you.
I noted your fence line is now adjusted, as you had mentioned in your testimony. I was looking at the fence line on the common lot line between you and lot 3. That's the lot to the north or to the left of the building. You have it shown coming into the front yard setback area. Is that
Oh, that was definitely by accident.
You'll stop. You'll
Yes.
Stop at the front yard. setback.
That was a
Clarify.
CAD command of offset line that
Mhm.
I did not trim.
I've done that as well.
Sorry, sorry.
So it's going to stop it where that 42, roughly where the 42 is?
Uh,
Am I-
At the front yard.
where the
setback.
10-foot line,
the
the
10 foot
10-foot
is.
dimension
Okay.
is, it'll stop there.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Regarding the light fixture design that is proposed, you're showing use of 3 fixtures, one on the utility pole and then 2 of the decorative fixtures. Do you need all 3? I was curious about that. It didn't seem like you needed all that within such a small area.
Is this for the parking lot?
Yeah, for the parking lot area. I guess maybe I can offer that as something you take a look at because the light that's at the rear is at the common property line with the neighbor to the east, lot 7, I believe.
Mhm.
And it didn't seem like that light fixture was absolutely necessary. If that's something you could take a look at.
You know what looking at where all the foot candles are, and I think what happened is we utilized the 2 fixtures and not one on the,
Utility pole?
yes. So
Okay.
I'll have to, because I don't show, for some reason, I don't know why it didn't come up, was my average and mins and maxes. But when I look at the foot candles right there, they're like 0.1, which, so I think we put the 2 trying to overlap.
Yeah.
So we are gonna comply with, and if it's too much, we're gonna, if anything, then we would take out and try to spread from the utility poles, like put a
Okay.
fixture there to give a spread that's better and not need that one in the rear.
Instead of the one to the rear, right? If you did need the one to the rear, if you could move it a little bit closer to the parking spaces, maybe.
Okay.
Just to keep it away and then utilize the ability to focus the lights towards the parking lot and away from adjacent residential properties. Is one of the recommendations. You talked about the trees in the right of way, and I just wanted to clarify this.
Just I was making those.
Certainly.
We'll comply with that. That makes sense. So we're happy to.
Okay.
Regarding the trees proposed along the frontage of the property, you're taking out the tree that's in the right of way. It's actually underneath the overhead power lines that are there.
Yeah.
On the property, excuse me, adjacent to the property. And you're putting them into your property. And I think I would offer to the board that that's probably a better solution. It keeps the trees away from the overhead wires.
Yep, they won't
and
have
it
to be
gives them a
trimmed.
better growing condition. So it's one of the conditions or alternatives that are being offered here that I think makes sense. The apron for the driveway, you indicated that that's going to be a paver apron. And then would the pavers continue on the adjacent sidewalk area?
Yes.
Would you replace that and make sure that's
For our frontage,
in
we would,
accordance?
yes, for our tire frontage would be the continuation of the streetscape.
Okay. One thing I did take a look at tonight, you're proposing a sidewalk that's along the curb line of the parking area. It looks like a 4-foot wide sidewalk in that area. You do have that stop sign, I think you just identified, and that's what brought it to my attention. That's at that stop bar. Is that something where you may want to widen the sidewalk in that area?
Sure.
Because of the stop sign
Yes,
that's there. It's something of detail.
yes, we can do that.
The dumpster, excuse me, the trash can enclosure area, will that have a gate on it? I don't see any gates indicated. I imagine you would at the end of the 4-foot wall.
Yes, I didn't specifically call out. It would be a concrete slab and the fencing would tie into the rear yard fencing, the side of and then the 2 sides of the building and have a gate right at the walkway.
Okay. And that would be right up to the property line and up to the building. Okay, thank you. No further questions. Sure, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ed.
Actually, now that you say that, I might end up putting a little walkway. Because if the garbage men take it out through the gate instead of going across the grass,
Mhm.
add a little alongside of the fencing so they can get right to the curb. Because if they're bringing the cans out.
Mhm.
We can provide that as a detail on the plan if approved, subject to your engineer's approval.
To be reviewed.
Okay. You talked about some plantings on the north side, some more vegetation.
Yes.
What types of plantings would that be? Like arborvitae or something like that, or?
think they have.
I know you're gonna have a fence there too.
Yeah, they have columnar Norway maple, Norway spruce, excuse me, not maple,
Yes.
spruce.
So. That's not the right one. So the bigger symbols that are in blocks are the Norway spruces that they get planted at the 6 to 7 feet and then get tall. And then we broke them up a little around the one exit where the existing tree is on the other
Right,
side of the
right.
fence and put some lower
Lower.
shrubs in that area.
Okay.
If for some reason it does get discussed of any tree removal happening, we would just have a continuous, the zigzagged row of the spruces that go along the property line.
And that's an adequate buffer. Ed?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing that up. It was one thing I meant to look at was they are showing it in a staggered row along the back of the building. I would recommend they be closer to the common property line. It just keeps them away from the building, growing into the building. These will be narrow trees, and the columnar spruce are specifically a narrow growing species. And if they could possibly place it closer to the property line, away from the building, allowing some access in and around the building, if ever that was necessary. Otherwise, it's filling that entire space, and not, I think, logically placed.
We can do that.
Council?
That makes sense. The intention in terms of design is to try to just screen it.
Right, yeah,
Mhm.
buffering, yeah.
You can achieve one goal and then you lose another. So we're happy to do whatever's amenable.
Okay.
I think the landscapers are better at placing them.
It's just good if you showed it that way on the plan.
Yes.
That way.
I'll
you're-
tighten them up
you're
and push
encouraging the
them.
landscaper.
Oh,
to
giving
place
them
that location.
spreading room. No, I'll tighten them up and make sure that their width is proper to that property line.
I just want to be sure of one other thing. The trees that are at the, what would this be? I guess the west side, right along the sidewalk. You have that big tree where the entrance is. leading
Correct.
out. I guess they're pines coming first, whatever going in there. We're okay with that. It's not going to affect anything sightline. It doesn't appear to me that it will, but I'm asking.
No, because in fact, what they show is sort of an evergreen symbol, are in fact shrub material.
Oh,
That's in that area.
So-
Right.
Got it.
That shouldn't be a problem in that area.
Okay. Just want to make sure we don't have a problem with sightline with people coming down.
It's a good question because I would defer to Mr. Vreeland whether or not there is any issue with the trunk of the shade tree that's
Mhm.
proposed in that area. If you think we have enough distance on that side, or should they show a site triangle depiction so you have the ability to comment on it?
Yeah, I don't know based on what's on the plan.
Could we have that as something?
Yeah, I would suggest if the board was to approve it, to put a condition on there.
We accept the condition that a site triangle be maintained. We don't want to install something that's going to be a liability to
All right.
anybody.
Okay. Other board questions?
I have a couple.
Sure.
So I'll go backwards. So let's start with the buffer here. Currently, only because I do a lot of this, the spruce right now have a needle cast disease. So there's a possibility you're gonna lose a good amount of them. Would you guys consider not so much changing them, but maybe using maybe 1 or 2 species in that area so that if you do lose the spruces, it's not gonna become barren?
Do you have a better plant that doesn't lose the
Well,
species?
right. I'm just saying right now that it's nationwide where there's a needle cast disease. So what happens is they're growing and they're burning from the bottom up.
Hmm.
So you literally, it's a problem. So maybe a green giant.
I was gonna
it's a
say, are the
garden.
green giants better in this
They-
area?
They are, and the deer don't eat them.
I'll swap
But
it out.
I'm just either swap them or maybe mix them in.
I like green giants. I'll switch it.
Giants.
And they do grow a lot faster than the spruces.
Okay.
These are gonna take, 5 to 7 years to really.
That's
to
fine.
make a-
That's a great suggestion. My client
And-
agrees to that. We don't want to have to rip these out. It's 5 years.
I just hate to see you do something that's gonna look great, and then a year from now or 6 months from now, it's.
It'll be dead.
Yeah.
That's-
Okay.
it's not our intention.
Before you get to your other point, if I could just add for one quick second, yes, they do. They are better. Okay, and
My neighbor has them, but I haven't paid much attention. I know that they grow quickly, but
And they are deer resistant. They are deer resistant. And the question I was gonna ask you is, as you were talking about some of the evergreen, you said that you were gonna note deer resistance, but I didn't see any of that on the plan.
oh, my bad.
So if that can be added to the
Yes.
plans. I'm
That
sorry.
that should have
go
been
ahead.
picked up. We
I,
apologize.
if I missed it, I apologize.
No, I
I
might have.
scanned it just now and didn't see it. Sorry, thank you.
All right, the other thing is, I guess, right, going back to the streetscape,
Before you move on, do the green giant spruce require to be along the line as well?
you
I
could
just
plant
don't-
them along the line. I think they'd be
Yes.
better because they're not as columnar.
You don't have to
Well,
stagger them. They would
Okay,
be
I just-
planted.
So would it be,
They're
stipulate
wider.
it'll be green giant spruce? We'll make that change.
The other thing, going back to the streetscape, I know we're talking a lot about it, but are you guys aware that there is a newer streetscape happening? So you're gonna conform with the,
I was told
Newer
that,
streets.
yes, we were talked about it at the last meeting. I went online and was trying to find it. And when I talked with Mr. Reveal when we met on site, it was just, I know I'm gonna comply with it. I just don't know exactly all of the,
well, the first phase was complete, or the first and second phase, there's a
Yeah.
third and fourth that's gonna happen, but I just, right now, there's a paver that's probably from the early nineties, middle nineties, which is
we don't want to pick that paper.
yeah, we want to use.
Right.
the
Yes.
Most current.
The updated.
That's why I didn't do a detail because I want to make sure, well, A, that the sidewalk detail complies with your driveway, like making sure it has the hardiness for the driveway and the sidewalk, but also the block and stuff. I couldn't find it online, so I wanted to speak about whoever the contractor doing the submittals and whatever details there were that I could put them on.
I'm the director of operation.
Okay, great.
We'll deal with myself, Mr. Reland.
Thank you.
Phase 3 and phase 4 is.
That will make sure that's what we
Pre-construction
use
we
for those
already had,
blocks.
And phase 3 and phase 4 will be starting within 4 to 6 weeks, so.
Okay, awesome.
So that's perfect. The other thing on the utilities, since you guys testified and committed now to fire sprinklers, can you just revise it to show the dedicated line?
For the FDC connection?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
the FDC connection, the dedicated fire line, and then you would have a domestic line for the building itself.
We'll make that note.
So, yeah,
Thanks, Brian. Other members of the board?
no questions, but it's a public comment. I see some residents, if you're looking for a restroom, they're up here too. They're straight down that way. Okay, because the library's closed. So they're straight through that way. There's restrooms in that, through those double doors.
Thank you.
So I got one other question. If somebody looks at these plans, just so they understand what you did and why you did it. The property line to the north is skewed. Kind of, in other words, what I'm trying to state is that you set the property such that the front is perfectly parallel to Maple.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So because the property kind of.
Oh,
goes
yes,
at a
yes, yes.
small angle
It has,
from
yes, it
there,
does.
Okay. And then what you did was if I'm not mistaken, the property line on the right-hand side also has a skew to it, but not as deep a skew or as big a skew. So therefore, I guess what I'm leading up to is
They're
that
not parallel.
They're not
The
parallel.
left and side property, the left and right are not parallel.
Okay, but then what you did was you made the curb in front of the building, what would be considered the front of the building. You made that parallel to the right-hand property line. I'm kind of explaining this a little bit also for the public so that they understand what's going on. Okay, because if somebody was to look at this, be like, all right, why didn't you skew the building to match the property line on, I'm looking,
I think everything was off the right property line
okay,
because the front left of the building I have noted as 10 feet.
yes,
I didn't give a dimension to the back left, but it's more than 10 feet.
uh-huh,
So everything came off of the right side. So we
Okay.
have the curb lines parallel to the right property line.
mhm,
Then that was offset 18 feet for the parking stall, 24 feet for the parking aisle, then the sidewalk, then the building.
okay,
That you could lose more in a green space of it not being visual than a curbed.
I understand. I
Okay.
understand. I just
Okay.
kind of want you to explain it that if
Oh,
somebody
okay.
was to look at this, again, the property, the property is like that, yet you have the building like this. And then
Yes.
why it's like that, because the front of the building is
Parallel to the
parallel
street.
to the front of the.
And
to
then
the
we
street.
held what we consider the visual aspects because of the parking lot on the right side. So we
Mhm.
came off of there, figuring with all the greenscape on the left side is not as the visual impact of it looking. It looks it on paper, but when you're driving by, the building is parallel to the road. Yes.
Okay. The other question again, for just benefit of everybody, 8 parking spaces. I know it meets, but it's 8 with the handicap.
Yes.
All right, just so everybody understands. that as
Including the
well.
handicap.
8, including the handicap.
And
Okay,
we-
so there's 7 regular and 1 handicap.
Yes. And we do not trigger the need for an electric vehicle space.
Yes.
Okay.
Even though if we put one, we would qualify as having 9 spaces because that makes
Okay.
sense.
And again, we talked about this slightly last meeting, but I want to raise it one more time.
Sure.
The telephone pole, electrical pole, whatever,
Yes.
moving that is, can you just briefly, for the benefit of
The-
everybody, please?
Part of how the lot was designed and also to speak to one of the residents' comment, or not the resident,
It might have been somebody up
it was
there.
my other board about flipping the building for
Mhm.
setbacks and everything. The utility pole that we have designed, the striped area around has wires that go to a utility pole that is to the rear of the property. I don't want to hit your eye, Mr.
Right.
Kelly. Back there,
Mhm.
there is a utility line that comes and then services the back.
Mhm.
So part of the design was around that, which is why originally we had the dumpster area there, but also why the building was also set onto the side that it was not to be eliminating that pole with where it services. And we did look at there's a big box on it that not be good to move.
Okay. And also coming off of that pole is a Cobra head.
Yes, a Cobra head to the parking lot to the south that services this gentleman's
Oh,
property.
so it goes into that property, not in.
Yes, it goes into his property.
Okay. I'm sorry, I walked the property.
Okay.
Okay, I think that's all I have.
Fine. Any other members of the board? All right, I'll open it up to the public for questions and of the testimony you just heard. Ma'am, you have to re-identify yourself unfortunately, but that's the way it works.
No problem. Mahina McMaster, 46 Maple Street. Thanks for the updates. I just have a couple questions. So I understand, and I don't have the pointer, but you're moving I guess you're gonna have 4 HVAC units or like, is that right?
Yeah.
And then you're gonna have space for 4 garbage cans and,
Yes, in this area.
and will that also include recycling?
Yes.
So all of that would fit in that
Yes.
area? Is there any concern about the noise from having all those HVAC units?
No, the HVAC units are there's a code that they meet, which.
There's like a sound transmission, because the high efficiency tend to be much quieter in their operation today than if they're bigger, taller.
It's Mr. Scro jumping in, trying to help, but it's
Sorry.
not.
I
on
appreciate it.
record, so
No.
But
We'll
also-
meet all required codes.
There's the required codes, and also in this area, we have the 5-foot vinyl fence, it's a privacy fence and additional landscaping that can buffer any sound that would be coming out of them if there was.
Thank you. The 5-foot fence, does it go from the sidewalk all the way around to the following sidewalk? Like,
Yes, but no, not the sidewalk. We can't go past the front yard setback.
mhm.
Okay, we can't go past the front yard of the building. So it's starting basically where the parking stalls, going east and around the property line through the jog around the north side. And I had an error in my plan because of my offset command,
Mhm.
but it will end at the front line of the building.
Okay. So for snow removal, since you have 8 spots now, where would the snow removal be placed?
The intention would be smaller storms, which will be private, everything is gonna be private, some of the smaller, they would end up plowing and placing into the rear while they have in the winter time when their landscaping is cut down. If there are larger storms, they are gonna just do private removal, where they take it in their garbage trucks and leave. Where it goes, I don't know.
And that was stipulated to the last time as well.
My last question. So there are 8 spots, one's a handicap spot. So since there are 4 units, are there 2 spots assigned to each unit so that you won't see people parking on the street?
There aren't assigned units. The requirement is to have 8 spots. That includes a handicap spot.
So someone could like have guests or like
I
someone
think
could.
part of residential site improvement standards as the requirement for 2 spaces per unit factors in guest parking. It's the standard of the state. We are providing the 8 spaces required. As part of that, we have to provide 1 handicap parking.
So I guess my question, just because I don't know the rules with parking in our town, I know we can't park on the street
Overnight.
overnight. Can people park in the spots in town overnight? Like by Mezzaluna and Massa and those spots?
On the main street?
On the main street? Okay. So we wouldn't see an increase in those overnight spots. Like we shouldn't see anybody.
No, you
parking on-
shouldn't see
That's
it.
really an enforcement issue. If there are there, they will be
Okay.
handled however they're handled by the police department or the
Okay.
town.
Thank you.
Good questions.
Thank you.
Other members of the public? Ma'am.
Hello, hi, Michelle Bonacourt, 30 Maple Street, the house to the north.
Right, okay.
So I do have a question about the fence. Obviously, what's there now, if you know, it's all different heights. I would prefer something that's the highest you can possibly grant. And, not white vinyl, just if we could choose that. And also as far as the trees, the tallest that we can possibly put in across the street, separating the other two families, there's very, very tall wall of greenery, shrubbery. That's, I don't know what they are, but they look fantastic and you can't see the other property next door. And that would be my ideal. So that's my concern.
Okay. And do you have a comment to that concern?
Well, the highest fence we are permitted without a variance is the 5 feet. I can't comment to the vinyl part of it. As to the recommendation of the board members switching out to the green giant arborvitae's, which I believe they probably are across the street, is they are planted normally at the 6-foot height. And if I recall correctly from everything I was taught, is when that first year, they can grow 2 to 3 feet. You don't trim the top of it and they grow very fast. And they probably are where you're talking about, of the 12 to 15 feet. And as they fill in together and then you trim off the top of them, they form that wall.
Beautiful. So even though there's a fence there now that's probably 8 feet in some sections.
Don't know that, but it does stagger in the height, but
It's
Yeah,
wide.
there is some high spots, and some of that was to prevent headlights when the bank
Right.
operated.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
I know, as part of that, but
I
but that's a
dealt
whole-
with that when the drive-through was there, that was one of the.
yeah,
concerns.
I lived
That we
there, right,
changed.
except
Right.
they were ahead of the drive-through. But anyway,
So,
okay, so that's my comment. Thank you.
so what I think I'm hearing is that there's existing fence there that's over the 5-foot permitted.
When the drive-through was.
When the drive-through was-
Right. They raised it, right, yeah.
That was already an issue. I came on board in the borough. And that's what we did with the bank to try to alleviate the drive-through at night. When the cars come around for the resident. who just commented.
Problem we have is the current ordinance.
Right, yeah. The board has granted variances to 6 feet in the past in similar developments or multifamily developments in particular. So that is not uncommon for us to do if you choose to go up another foot or not.
The trees, they're going to be planted, 6-foot trees anyway.
Yeah.
They're going to be higher than the fence. I guess.
True.
I don't see why we would change it.
We haven't advertised for the variance, so that's my.
Okay,
concern.
yep, I got you.
But we're happy to speak later about it. I mean, 6 feet.
Right.
Difference on that side.
And if you
My
put,
client thinks the green giant.
if you put big enough
Covered
trees,
anyway.
that's probably gonna suffice.
But I don't want the board to lose jurisdiction. at this point.
Right, okay.
And you don't have the issue of the cars circulating with this.
Yeah, that's another point I was gonna make.
Right, you got a building there.
About it. The whole purpose of the 8-foot fence, from what I'm hearing, was the headlights, but the building actually acts as a screen. So you're not gonna see it. And the building's gonna be a lot higher than 8 feet. But
Right.
compliant.
Yes. We do like our height restriction. Other members of the public? Ma'am?
Hello, Nadia Parshina, 45 Elm Street. So I guess my question, I don't quite understand with this type of properties with multifamily buildings. Is there any requirements for the paved area versus grass area? Because to me, it looks like everything is paved and it's kind of,
So you're talking about impervious coverage.
I guess so. I'm not sure like the terminology, but it looks like everything is paved, not much grass and it's not,
Okay, so we'll
that's
ask the
not
engineer.
fair.
Do you meet the impervious coverage?
Mhm.
I don't know if there is a standard. in this
there is.
Commercial zone.
Well, yes, that's, yeah. There, in the commercial zone which we're in, there isn't actually a coverage requirement. So.
But you're converting to a
But you're
residential.
converting it to the residential, yes, that's why you're gonna have like families there and it's kind of not fair.
Right, but from a zoning perspective, if we're complying with the regulations of the zone that we're in, and even with the increase in coverage, we're taking all of our coverage into a stormwater detention system. So we're doing more than what's there today. If that,
One of the standards is you have to control the water outflow on your property, and they have engineering testimony that says they will do that through seepage pits and capturing of the water,
Okay.
instead of having it
I mean,
sheeting off
I don't know
property.
much about it.
No,
I
that's,
just,
that's a good
board is
question.
okay,
You're,
if it's
you made a good
building
question.
department is agree
Excellent.
with that, I'm totally
Yep.
fine. The other question is, have you considered installing solar panels and heat pumps and like something renewable instead of going with gas and electric service?
no,
And may I ask why?
It's not required.
It's not required,
Right.
not even to consider it.
We've considered a lot of things for this site, but we're just going with this is the application presented. Makes the most sense.
Just we're trying to save the trees and by putting the renewable solar panel on top of the building, I think it would make sense.
Okay.
All right, that's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mike, are you okay with the impervious coverage? I know you're looking at it, so.
I'm just trying to get a handle on it. I'm not aware of anything in the code requiring restricting impervious coverage in the zone. I mean, it is a commercial zone. It may not be a commercial proposal, but the intent of having the impervious coverage requirement is to control stormwater runoff
Right.
to a certain degree, and I think they satisfied that goal or that component of it.
the only comment I would make with that is while there's not the zoning requirement for that we're working with the commercial zone, but with the residential zone is we're increasing our coverage by approximately 1,000 square feet. And if this was a residential zone, you'd be required to only capture that 1,000 square feet. So if someone were putting up a new house or a pool, they'd only have to capture that area. In this case, we are capturing our entire 7,300 square feet of impervious coverage.
Okay, thank you. Other members of the public? Sir? Then ma'am, you're after him.
name is Jack Grossman, and I have the property on 23 Maple Street. My question is, must be over a year ago, my brother owned a three-family house on Myrtle Avenue across the street from the Exxon station. And we had to get reapproval as a three-family house because it was grandfathered in. My question is, why would you even consider a four-family unit in a town that forbids three-family houses? I don't understand why that's allowed.
That's not really an engineering question for this
Oh, okay.
witness.
I'm sorry, I asked out of turn
It's-
then.
No
But
problem to ask.
do you
It's just- it's
understand my
not
point of
really-
view?
It's not relevant to the testimony that's been.
I
presented.
understand that as well,
You
and
can
I'll have
maybe
to
raise
ask
that
her
as
at a different
commentary
time.
later.
Thank you very much.
Ma'am?
Hi, I'm Connie Deering. I live at 72 West Allendale Ave. My concern is the garbage area. Because the building that I'm in, which is owned by my family, it's a commercial building on the bottom, two apartments on the top. I'm worried that in the past, there's been renters over in Mezzaluna, when they can't get rid of the garbage, they dump it in the dumpster. I don't want the back parking lot by my area to be a dumping ground for cardboard that they can't get rid of. I know you're providing one garbage can for each unit. How is that going to be enough? I'm single in an apartment, and sometimes I can produce 2 bags of garbage, depending on if it's a holiday or whatever. I'm just afraid that people are going to be dumping stuff into the dumpster. What happens then?
Again, Mr. Chairman, I would say that's an enforcement issue. My client is offered as a condition of this to have private carting.
All right.
Technically, the borough can't even do that because you can't discriminate against a renter from a homeowner. If the homeowner gets picked up, the renter has to get picked up under state law. And they're volunteering to do this to make sure we don't have it.
That would be wonderful, but would they be coming twice a week or once a week? Because if it's one garbage can per
We're
unit.
not even approved yet. I don't know. We'll work
Okay,
it
well, that
out
would
so
be
there's-
something that I would be concerned with that, and as far as the cardboard pickup and stuff like that.
Recyclables.
As-
Yes.
As the owner of the building, we want it to be nice for the tenants, otherwise I can rent it.
Right.
If the client's making a substantial investment in Allendale, we're gonna make sure it's compliant.
Okay,
If it's
that's
not
perfect.
compliant, they're gonna get tickets.
Okay,
And it doesn't go to the tenant, it goes to the property.
okay, sounds fair enough.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman, and ma'am,
Thank
just
you.
1 second. Just for
Go ahead,
example, Michael Matola is our property maintenance inspector. He kind of comes under I just had a meeting with Mr. Limatola today. Buddy's all known. He's also the Celery Farm and the Fell House, and he keeps a running list. We actually have, not on your side of the street, but on the other side of West Arundel, we currently have a couple of those similar situations, and Michael is ticking them, or giving them at least a chance to correct the situation. So
Okay.
that is an issue. Again, it's not the homeowners, owner, it kind of comes up, Mr. Limatola, he does a great job with it.
Okay.
It's a constant problem
All right,
we deal with.
all right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ross.
Mr. Kelly, I believe at the last meeting we discussed or was testified to that the collection would be twice a week.
Whatever the stipulation was, we will abide by it.
Thank you.
But candidly, I just don't.
That's fine. I just wanted a point of clarification.
I'll make those-
Thank you.
Other members of the public? Sir?
Hi, Spencer Roach, 45 Maple Street. I had a kind of a follow-up question on the parking. So there's 8 spots total, 7 non-handicap and 1 handicap.
Mhm.
So there's 4 units. If each unit has 2 vehicles, then, and assuming none of them are allowed to use the handicap spot, do we know where that 8th vehicle would go? Like, would they park across the street or like, I'm just curious. I don't know how that works.
Well, that's a legitimate question. However, the requirements by our code are 2 per unit. So they've met the requirements by proposing it. We can't really speculate as to where cars go and don't go. I don't have better to answer that.
And beyond that, it's not just our code, the state has developed residential site improvement standards. So these are the standards that are supposed to be followed throughout the state for residential projects. And in that code, there's a table that sets forth the number of parking spaces based on the number of bedrooms. So, and it's a fair question because it's the kind of question that I hear a lot in a lot of different settings. But that's the regulation and that's what they're required to follow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other members of the public? Sir?
Yeah, Matt Rockwell, 37 Elm Street. What I'm concerned about is the drainage pipe that's right hand. No, you've got a big.
The inlet there.
Where's that going?
We actually inspected that and didn't see any actual out to it. Didn't see a pipe coming in or out of it. It was just. something-
Water going on in my property and going through here. You're gonna take that out and you got.
The
you got your
inlet,
curb.
we've noted for the inlet, if there are piping that we might not have seen when we opened the grate and looked in it, all of that's coming out.
Yeah.
So
So where's
our,
the water gonna go on that slant that goes back?
our new, they're going into the underground detention system, which is gonna hold the water, infiltrate into the ground, and if it overflows, we're gonna be bringing it out to the street.
We'll be able to, next winter, come into my backyard and see about a 40-foot circle diameter across as a green when everybody else is white. I think that pipe's going on, the water is going where it shouldn't be going now. So I want to make sure that's done. Where is the pipe, the station for the electricity to go from my property across to where your finger is right about there?
This isn't being touched. The
You're gonna put
electricity,
pole in your parking lot.
the pole in our parking lot to the pole that's over here somewhere is remaining. But if during construction, when they take out this pipe or the inlet and the pipe is found that we can't see visually from what we're doing, it will be mitigated. We will be talking with the engineer, I'm doing this on another property where during construction.
I would hope it's going on to your property.
Correct.
We never complained about it because it just didn't bother anybody.
We have noted on our plans, and it is a stipulation of Mr. Breland with your engineer, and I believe it comes in your resolution, is that development of the property shall not impact your neighbors. And if it does, we have to.
If it's open to something where it should be going, you're gonna block it. Or cover it over.
For the storms and the drainage that's required by ordinance, we provide them what is mitigated. We cannot control or capture Idas and Hurricane Irenes and groundwater. So if there are issues of that, we can't, if it's not from our property, we can't fix your problem.
Well, I don't know, how do I have this green spot? The grass is there and there's snow everywhere else. It's
I
about
can't answer that
250
question.
feet from that sewer pipe.
Unfortunately, I can't answer that
I've been
question.
watching that. And then the tree, I'm not happy with the tree because the tree has been there since winters.
We're not showing for the tree to be removed. We're not showing for the tree to be removed. We're putting
They
fence
put a
around.
red marker on it, but that just.
Oh, that was because we were, the tree court, when he was evaluating the trees, it was to notify us of what
How
he was
about the
talking.
10-foot right of way, excuse me, interrupted, between Mrs. DeVries and our place going out to the, on the side of your parking lot?
This
No,
area.
put your finger there on the corner. No, right over, yeah, there. There's 10 feet going right there. And we have a right of way in 1927.
This right here,
Yes, ma'am.
that's not our property. So we're not
Well,
in.
how are you gonna address your property to that slope that goes in?
Our grades are meeting the grade at our property line. So whatever slope is in that right of way is not our issue to handle.
Okay, so you're gonna have just a
The curb is,
concrete wall, whatever it is. The gentleman back there said, you know, you're gonna have about a 3.5 foot drop. So you're gonna correct that with your concrete, so you're on the line and none of the water is going over this side. We're able to come out. that right of-
where our curb lands at the property line will be at the grade that it exists today. We will not be grading onto the neighbor's property nor correcting any slopes on his property.
Well, if I'm standing there where you're showing the big tree there. I mean, it's way over 5 foot. You know, Yeah, okay, you could be standing there too, but that goes right there. No, not the big tree is.
Back here,
Move to your left a little bit.
here.
Yeah, going
Your
down
tree.
there, where it's over 5 feet of my head with the line of your property.
Okay,
So you're gonna build there a wall to make sure that water doesn't come down?
we're not building any walls.
Pardon?
We're not building any walls.
What's the property line? Who's gonna know what the line or instead
The
of?
fence
The
line,
dog won't know the difference unless you won't jump the fence.
there's gonna be a fence. We're not installing property corners. We don't have to.
You don't have to, I got 12. so you
Okay.
don't need to know.
The fence will outline the property and our grades. We cannot grade on anyone else's property or touch their property line.
When you do that pipe, I'd like to get, I said, that spot is 200 feet from the property line
Okay,
over, going east. And that water is coming from somewhere. It's gotta be a creek underneath this property.
okay.
Because we have one on our other house on Elm Street. Next door, she has all the water going into it. I get it. She runs the thing. And where the Walgreens was, they got a diving place that you could test divers go in there, how deep the water is in that building. Maybe you ought to check it
Outside the
out.
building?
Inside,
Oh, okay,
in the basement.
got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But just a point of clarification that you won't, any improvements you would be doing on this property would not exacerbate any surrounding property
Will
runoff
not
matters.
exacerbate, nor will we be fixing or mitigating any issues on adjacent property.
Understood.
All right.
And your intent is to keep overall, keep whatever slope heights, et cetera, that are currently on that property the way they are right now. Because I do know that there is a
The
slight slope
no, the
towards the
slopes
back.
on our property may change.
Okay.
But where the curb lines or
Uh-huh.
anything meets the property line, we are meeting those grades.
Got it.
All right.
We will not be touching. If we end up needing it and I walk this and it does slope down, we're not fixing that, leveling it off, touching whatever right of way easement, anything on neighbor properties. There'll be silt fence up, there'll be construction fence up. We're all working all interior to our lot.
And the existing inlet, if there is a pipe situation there, you'll remedy that.
We will, and when we were out there, we looked in it.
All right,
We did
you
not, I
didn't see it.
think it's just an inlet that just goes in.
Inlet to nothing.
Like-
All right,
like
not piped
fertilizing.
anyway.
It might hurt, it might hold the
There might be-
bottom and it just
Right.
be an actual seepage pit down there, because we didn't see pipes coming into it.
Okay.
But if approved. when
Right.
we Dig it up, if we come up with something, we're gonna have to bring it to Mr. Breland's attention and figure out, we can't make it worse on neighbors.
Mhm.
So whatever we have to do to not do that.
So that's the point. Is
And
the proposed drainage an improvement to what is currently existing?
Yes,
And again, we have on the record, or can we agree that if something, when that's dug up, that if there's something, if that something has to be fixed in the existing on the property, that'll be handled with our engineer.
We'll have to do that. I think you, correct me if I'm wrong, both engineers can correct me, but I think we find that we have to notify the borough.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Mr. Breland on speed dial.
Other members of the public? Hearing and seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Any other members, questions of the board? Our engineers or our professionals, well?
I
We're
don't have
good?
anything else right now.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I think Ms. Osborne addressed everything she could, anything she was not able to do because of the time constraints. To do as a conditional approval, she would do in favor of on the
Okay.
application.
We appreciate the changes you did make based on our conversations from last meeting.
They were positive comments and it made for a better project, so we appreciate the board making those. I'd like to call Mr. Simoff, my traffic expert.
This is Pavlovian.
Mr. Simoff, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth through the course of your testimony?
Yes, I do.
Thanks, sorry.
All right, Mr. Simoff, can you share with the board and the public your educational and work credentials?
I'm a graduate civil engineer of NJIT. I'm a licensed professional engineer. I also have a planner's license. albeit. And I'm a fellow with the Institute of Transportation Engineers. I've been in the practice of traffic engineering for a good number of years. And I've appeared before this board previously. I understand it's getting late, and I just want to bring out some key.
I gotta offer you, you're
Oh.
testifying as a traffic engineer, correct?
Yes,
Right, I'm offering him as a witness in traffic engineering, Mr. Chairman, as an expert. in traffic.
And your licensing is all up to date?
yes,
Okay, we'll accept.
thank you. I understand it's getting late and the board has heard a lot about this application. There are just a couple of key points that I'd like to bring forward.
Do you have an opinion about this with key points that you'd like to bring forward, Mr. Simon?
Yes.
So can you please share that with the board?
Sure. The bank, I did some trip generation calculations. If this was a drive-through bank, obviously it's not in operation. The daily traffic based on the Institute of Transportation Engineers, the projections are 240 movements a day. For 4 units, it's 8 units per day.
Can you just explain what movements are?
The total of in and out, it's 50% in, 50% out, obviously. And the peak hour numbers for the afternoon peak hour, which would be the roadway peak hour, the number for a bank is 54 movements. So that's like 27 in each direction. The 4 units that are proposed using the same source and the same criteria is 2. So we were going from 54 units to 54 movements to 2 movements. I think that would embellish Catherine Gregory's testimony as well. Now, another interesting point is on Allendale Road, the 2-directional traffic in the morning is about 420 cars. On Maple Street, the 2-directional traffic in the morning is 37. So the difference in traffic is important in talking about the viability of this site. And then in the morning, that was the afternoon, 37 on Maple. In the afternoon, in the morning, it's 53 movements. So effectively, if the bank were open, it would double the traffic on Maple. If it's residential, it would be adding two movements. So I think that those are important factors in the board's deliberations. This is a much
difference with regard to other uses that are permitted in the C1 zone and what's permitted, what's going to be generated by the bank.
They're all going to be on the same order of magnitude. If we look at the 53 movements that are projected, it's 27 in and 27 out. That's about 1 every 2 minutes. So it's not an intensive use for the bank, but it would be comparable for any other residential development on the site. So I think that's one of the other
Commercial.
commercial. That's one of the other positives to this variance.
Do you have an opinion as to whether there's an overall improvement?
Well, we meet the parking, we meet and there's been some studies, the Urban Land Institute and the Institute of Transportation Engineers have come up with studies and recommendations for parking near train stations. And those are much less because people locate near, rent or locate near train stations, and with a convenient walking distance, those numbers are less. So there's been discussion of 2 per unit, but the ITE is less, and the Urban Land Institute is 1.4 per unit if it's near a train station. So I think that we have that factor of safety in the design.
And overall, do you think that the proposed application as a licensed traffic engineering expert is better than the alternative that would be permitted under the current C1?
Clearly,
I have nothing further for Mr. Simon. Oh, actually, this is all compliant with RSIS, correct?
yes.
And with regard to the turning ratios and the traffic pattern in the parking lot, do you have any opinion as to whether this will be compliant with RSIS and will work?
It complies with RSIS. It's a standard layout, and the circulation will work as well.
No, and you base that on the RSIS and your knowledge?
Correct.
Any IT studies or anything like that?
It's simple engineering.
Okay,
Nothing further. Mr. Chairman.
thank you. So some of the numbers you quoted in terms of trips was calculated how? You weren't there observing it, it was calculated by statistics?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify
And
that.
so I compared both the ITE standards, the Institute of Transportation Engineers. They issued a publication in the fall of 2021. It was the 11th edition. So it's been updated every couple of years.
Okay,
And they have so it's peer reviewed. And so I use both sources. I use the same source for both uses, a drive-through bank or residential.
okay. Thank you for that.
Excuse me, Mr. Simoff, do you have an address?
Sure. 2 Shunpike Road, Madison. I'll give you a card.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nothing further.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Board professionals?
No, no. No questions. It's generally acceptable practices and I've heard this kind of testimony. It's consistent with the published and guidance manuals.
Thanks, Mike. I'll open it up to the public. Any members of the public? Wish to raise a question on what Mr. Simoff has just testified to. Ma'am, you're gonna have to come up and restate your name and address for the record.
Yes. Hi, again, Michelle Bonacourt, 30 Maple Street. My question is, I love your statistics and I get it, but what about the afternoon or evening? Because living on the street, I know for sure there is a lot of traffic. The lunch crowd, the dinner crowd, living next to the drive-through. Yes, it was a nuisance, but there didn't seem to be that many cars coming through compared to what I see on the daily in town. So
I gave the statistics for Allendale Avenue, Allendale Road. That's in the morning, it's 420 trips. We did it. let me
on
back
Main
up.
Street,
Yeah, on
Yeah.
Main Road. We did traffic counts in the morning on January 13th, which was a Thursday. And then we went back on Friday, January 14th, and we did counts. So the morning counts were done between 7 and 9 a.m. And the afternoon counts were done between 3 and 6. Peak hour occurred in the afternoon between 3 and 4. So I guess it was attributable to school or whatever. The school was open. And in the morning, the peak hour was between 7 and 8 a.m. So those numbers I gave were for the main road, which reinforced the fact that this is not really a commercial site because one wants high traffic volumes for commercial use. It's more akin to a buffer or a fill-in because the traffic volumes on Maple are during the morning peak hour were 53 movements, 2 direction. So it was, significantly less than Allendale Road, but it was more than a simple residential street. So this fits in with that concept.
I'd be curious to know what those numbers are in the afternoon and evening hours.
I mean,
It's just,
beyond
it's
the
on an
peak-
aside. Just-
Beyond the peak is your question.
Yeah,
Well, the numbers that I also gave the numbers for the 24-hour volumes for the use. For the existing, it's 240 movements. So it's like 120 in and 120 out over a full day. And for the 4 units, it's 8 movements, 4 in and 4 out. So, clearly the numbers are much less intense. Irrespective of what you put there, this is probably one of the lowest traffic volume users you're going to see in the C1 zone.
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
It certainly also helps, sorry, just general, I guess that there's not gonna be idling cars in the drive-through either.
True.
Jack Grossman, 23 Maple Street. My question is, what conditions were the roads when you did your counts? The traffic isn't the problem. The problem is the parked cars on either side. The stores on West Allendale Avenue, either the patrons or the owners of the stores park on that street. And when you have cars parked on either side, and you can't have two-way traffic because the street isn't wide enough. So, I don't think the numbers truly reflect the traffic problem there. And God forbid there's an emergency or something, people can't pass that way. It's terrible. You can't get in and out of my driveway when cars are parked on both sides of the street.
You're talking Maple Street or?
Maple Street,
Right, okay.
yes. It's a true problem. And I think the people that live on Maple Street are well aware of it. And, the numbers, they sound wonderful, but in reality, it really sucks. Really, you can't get in and out of your driveways. It's terrible.
I
And if
suspect
there's
that's
an
just-
emergency or
It's
something.
mostly in the evenings when Mezzaluna and the restaurants are open.
No, it's not that. It's during the day when people are going to the different shops and stores because they're parking on Maple Street.
Still still.
It's a
Restaurant,
residential,
yeah, and
residential
restaurant driven.
width street,
Mhm.
and you're running a lot of traffic through there. And I think that should be taken into consideration as well. Thank you.
Chairman, the
thank you.
testimony is, it's gonna be a reduction. I understand what the gentleman's saying.
Right.
And that's the current condition. I accept that. He lives here, he knows it. This is a less intense use. It's 8 cars.
Right.
It's a what?
It's a
Less-
less intense use. It's 8
Then it-
cars.
Well, it's immaterial what use it is. I'm talking, the bank isn't being used now. And the conditions are terrible.
I understand.
Okay,
If it
well,
was-
what are we
I
gonna
don't- I
widen
don't
the
mean to
street?
argue with
We're
you.
gonna make it one way?
No, we're gonna leave the street the way it is, which is what we're permitted to do as another property owner, just like you. But this is a less intense use than what can go in there.
Less intense use, but it's, I think it's gonna be a problem for all of us who live there. And please take that into consideration.
What would the?
Thank
number-
you.
What would the numbers be if we looked at what would be allowed? Of course, they would be larger, but maybe that would help everyone understand. If it was a retail with apartments, obviously the numbers are gonna be greater than 8 trips per day. Is that accurate?
A two-family house like was there originally.
But it's a C1 zone, so they would be allowed to put retail with apartments, which would therefore increase your trip generation. Correct?
Yes.
How- Would you know, is there
Well,
a way to know? what
I
that
think the
number is?
bank is probably the most intense use on this property.
All right, especially a drive-up window.
Drive-through
How
bank.
about,
But if it was a retail store, you're gonna get 10 or 20 cars an hour.
And then you'll still have the
You still have
apartment.
the
And
apartments.
you still have the apartments above. And the apartments I would venture to say that the numbers are so low that once you get to the bottom of the scale, you can't go much below 2 movements during the peak hours.
I think something else to consider here is this has been a vacant property for so long that we've almost forgotten what was there. And
Right.
it's been vacant. I mean, now we have nothing, and either way, there's gonna be an increase in traffic regardless.
Whatever you put on.
Over what it
Exactly.
currently.
Because there's nothing
over-
there.
Over what it currently is.
Correct.
Okay, but what was it? Like, I think you said, it would be interesting to know what the numbers were when it was previously used as a drive-through.
He's
Okay.
representing that it's 240 trips per day.
There, as,
Versus
in a
8.
regular conventional bank versus the 8.
A 2-lane drive.
Right, all right, then you're right. Then there you go. So it's a substantial drop.
Decrease.
But granted, it is over what we currently have because the bank property isn't being used.
Exactly. There's 2 parcels that are.
We can't expect the applicant to keep his place
Of
vacant.
course not. Of course not. No.
Okay, other members of the public? Ma'am?
I don't know if Mr. Simoff addressed Mr. Trino's question to his satisfaction.
I'm just, again, just to clarify it, if it's retail with apartments over it, is it your opinion that it would be much more intense? Would it generate more trip generations versus the 4 units that they're proposing?
Correct, yes. Significantly.
And that's something that would be allowed and therefore would not
come before.
would not come before this board.
Right.
So just to clarify, in your opinion, of all the matters that could be considered, this is the least intensive use of traffic.
I would think that a two-family house would generate approximately the same number of trips.
Thank you.
A single family generates 1 per hour.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, you
Mahina McMaster, 46 Maple Street again. Not so much questioning your statistics, but kind of questioning the statistics.
Sure.
So you stated that the numbers were captured on January 13th and 14th.
Yes.
I think just because of the pandemic, those numbers may be a little skewed. A lot of people were working from home. Some school, at that point, schools kids may or may not have been going to school. So I just wanted to.
Well, I just did the counts to get an order of magnitude.
Understood, but I, being a parent of 3 kids that I've driven to the schools, I could tell you that I'm surprised at the number of trips that you captured on Maple Street, living on Maple Street, because I'm in and out of my driveway at least 15 times a day between work and my kids.
We did the count at the intersection, so maybe some of the trips from the bank property
I'm not sure.
factored into that, but
I'm not sure. And then also just thinking about when the bank ATM was open, from what I recall, and it's been a couple years, I don't think it was open 24 hours a day. I think the Bank of America also had an ATM available within the vestibule of the bank. So there were an alternative place to get
no,
cash.
the numbers that I gave are to compare 24 hours to 24 hours. The bank wasn't open. It doesn't assume that the bank is open 24 hours. It's an average day's traffic volume.
Okay, yeah, but I don't recall seeing traffic anywhere near the numbers that
Well,
were
it-
shared.
It would be if the bank is open, say 12 or 14 hours during the day, from
Mhm.
7 a.m. to whatever, 5 or 6 p.m. That would generate 120 trips in and 120 trips out. So it's about 10, 12, 15 per hour.
Right.
And then just to the gentleman's point about the traffic on Maple Street, and I'm not sure if any of you travel Maple Street on a regular day, but I don't drive a very large car, and I typically have to pull over to the side every time I pass on Maple Street because of the cars parked on both sides of the street. There is not an opportunity to drive down that narrow street without pulling over because there's not enough room for 2 cars to go in both directions. And that is 7 days a week, morning, afternoon, evening. And so it's not just restaurant traffic. And I do have concerns that when you do, like if you do get approval and you begin construction, what's going to happen to the traffic patterns on that street during the time of construction? Because we've had, when the bridge was being repaired, and I say that in quotes because it wasn't really repaired on Elm Street and Franklin Turnpike, but when that street was closed and it was almost like a cul-de-sac, I mean, the cars in and out, not having a 2-way access on Maple and Elm made things very difficult for the residents.
Mhm.
So I would be very concerned at how traffic is going to be considered during construction. Because I don't imagine this is going to be like a
Comply with
6-month,
Whatever the borough requires.
because as it is right now, it's very difficult to travel up and down that street.
I understand that. That's something that can be discussed with the governing body, I suppose.
Right.
But my client is providing what they're required to provide. 8 spaces, it's 8 cars. That's actually 7 cars and 1 handicap accessible.
I understand you're complying with the rules for what you're asking to do. I'm just saying it's making our lives very difficult.
We're complying with the law.
Right.
We can't, no one can ask us to do more than the law requires.
The developer isn't responsible for widening the street.
I
It's
understand,
At
but
the
I
end of
think
the
the
day.
fact that we're taking what is a very small parcel of property and we're repurposing it in this manner makes life very difficult for the residents on that street, short
Okay.
term and long term.
Okay, thank you. Other members of the public? Hearing none. Oh, gentlemen.
Hi, Spencer Roach, 45 Maple. So you said that you conducted your counts in January.
Yes.
Do you think if you were to conduct your counts, say, same weekdays next week, that they would be materially different than what you counted in January?
Maybe 5 or 10% difference. There's a seasonal variation that one experiences. As long as both were school days, I can't tell you if school was open, I didn't check that. But there is a seasonal variation of a few percentage from the winters to the spring, 4 or 5% high. But again, that makes my case. The higher the traffic volumes on the street, the less impact we have in percentage point of view.
Okay, I mean, that's your testimony, so, but basically, you don't think it would have like a material impact on your conclusion?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Actually, I disagree. with this. It doesn't, if it's higher, because it was done during COVID, or because it was done at another season, another time,
Oh, it's less of a, it's less of. a
it's even less of
percentage.
an impact. So
Right.
it does have an impact on the decision. doesn't
But
it?
the results are consistent. 2 or 4 cars an hour isn't going to change the quality of life.
I've nothing further to say.
Okay. Any other final? Before I bring it back, I'll bring it back to the board. Any questions from Mr. Simoff from the board or its professionals? Nope. We're done with that witness? Yep, I'm sorry.
I have
We're
one-
finished with Mr. Simoff.
I'm finished with Mr. Simoff. I have one brief question for Mr. Scrub. It's Still under a.
I'm patiently waiting.
It's all good. Excuse me. Can everybody hear me? So I'll keep this very brief.
No, I have to ask you a question.
Please do.
Okay. You were asked to revisit the
Aesthetics.
appearance and the aesthetics of the building,
Mhm.
and you've provided details as to that. Can you just describe for the board
Yes.
what you propose?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. 5 quick talking points. So the concern was that perhaps it was a little bit too modern or transitional, right? So certainly, thank you. From an architectural standpoint, certainly nothing about the building is modern. So I should go on record as saying that it's classic kind of gable forms. You have farmhouse style grills, clapboard siding, stone base. I mean, it's really as residential as it can be in the sense that it has all the vernacular and kind of components of traditional residential architecture. But what we tried to do was analyze it and say, well, what could be mistaken as modern? So one of the first things we did is we took the windows and, well, it's not going to really work on a screen so well. But I took the windows and moved them changed them from black to white. So they were initially proposed. You see it a lot now. It's quite popular. But certainly our client was amenable to the idea of softening the palette. So we did that. So we changed the windows to white. The second thing is we warmed the coloration of the siding. I think, again, gray can sometimes move into that transitional modern palette. So we warmed the color up, also tried to increase the scale of the stone to more of a river rock that we find indigenous, if anybody digs a garden here. So the stone is less stacked, which can also sometimes, lend itself to a more modern association. So this will be less stacked and more in keeping with a traditional stone. 2 more quick ones. They're subtle, but at the gables, at the gutter lines, we introduced gable returns. So they're the little kind of, for lack of a better word, where the bottom of the triangle hits. There's a small little return roof, trying to kind of further move this into the kind of traditional kind of colonial architectural language. And finally, we replaced up in the gable, we had initially some slats as kind of a detail just to try to give that gable some aesthetic and some character as opposed to just being blank. But that can also in some ways, I think, be perceived as more modern in its ideation. So we simply replaced it with a small window. It's a window to nowhere, but at least it gives it, again, a kind of a perhaps a more traditional feel. That's the extent of the changes that we tried to make to just help soften and maybe more Allendale eyes, if that's a new word, the aesthetic.
Okay. Yeah, I for one appreciate the softening tones here. It makes it more blends better with the rest of the street and the residential B zone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Because it was, I think it was Joe Delavisio raised the question of the gray, the black, it
Mhm.
just looked far too modern
Completely understand.
for what we were hoping to see here. So that's to me, that's better. That's an improvement.
Thank you.
Do you have can you show us what the rear elevation looks like? Because I know you.
I don't have that in a rendering. It is part of the architectural plans if we want to kind of address that. But yeah, I could touch upon the high points of, so essentially all the treatments, the gable returns, the windows, the stone is continuing around. It's not as if we're saying, well,
You're
you know.
cutting off because it's the back, right?
Precisely. And that actually is to the credit of the client who, initially, that's not always the directive that we are
Right.
offered, right? So it was nice to be able to have a contiguous. So all of the details that you see on the parking lot facing side are going to be contiguous to the north facing side, the neighbor.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions from the professionals, the board's professionals?
No.
Okay. I'll open it up to the public. Any questions from the public on what you just heard testified? Going once, going twice. Not seeing any, I'll bring it back to the board. Any other questions from the board? Any? Thank you, thank you.
Chairman, that's all the witnesses I have. That concludes my case. I'd just like the opportunity to sum up briefly.
All right.
But I know you have to hear from the public.
Okay. So you want to sum up after the public, right? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure I understood that.
Unless,
Okay.
unless your procedures are otherwise.
No, I don't believe so.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, this is the I'm going to open the meeting up to the public for comments in general. You don't have to be specific to any testimony you heard. You're able to give your comments on the general nature of this proposal and to, try to obviously influence the board one way or the other. As neighbors who most of you, I think, we've had testimony from our Elm Street, or not Elm, or some are Elm, but Maple Street residents. So that's important to this board that we hear from the neighbors one way or the other in helping us come to a decision. So with that, I'll open it up to any members of the public who want to be heard on general comments. It's the same procedure. You come up, state your name and address, and give us your comments.
However, since it is testimony, you'll be sworn in as
Okay.
testifying.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Any comments from members of the public who were here? Sir, please come up. We'll swear you in.
Name again?
Jack Grossman, 23 Maple Street.
Swear or affirm to tell the truth in your testimony?
I certainly do.
Very good.
Question, the question I posed before and you said it was an improper time to ask it. Why would you question a three-family house where there's only one in Allendale? And you would turn around and even consider a four-family in Allendale? What's the difference? They're the same size lot, 100 by 100-foot lot. Why is this? Because this man purchased a piece of property that basically has limited utility, but because he's proposing to build a four-family house and it's considered. Why is that?
The only thing I can tell you, and I'm not answering your question, admittedly, is that I don't know anything about your. other
No, I
property
understand
or
that.
Anything like that.
I
The
understand.
applicant has the right to bring whatever application he proposes. And the board has the determination and responsibility to make a determination on the application before us, not taking into consideration any other applications in town or anything related.
I
to that.
understand that.
So if your commentary is about it should or shouldn't be approved, that's, I think, fair commentary. with regard to other properties that are not before this board, I don't think the board can answer your question.
Well, the board doesn't want to answer that question. It's not a
No,
question.
it's not that they don't want to, they don't know the question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, other members of the public? Ma'am?
Again, Michelle Bonacourt, 30 Maple. I did write a
We'll
little.
need to swear you in. just-
Absolutely.
You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do. I bought my home in 1997. I love my block. I love this town. My personal concern with the plan is the loss of light and privacy to my home with a 2.5-story structure that will pretty much be running along my entire property line from the front of my house all the way to the back. The daylight in the rooms of my house that are now filled with sunshine most certainly will be blocked on that entire side of my home and yard. Plus, portions of my backyard and patio will now be in shadow when there was none. As far as the volume of cars, our street is coming back to pre-pandemic volume. And I have witnessed firsthand it becomes a one-way street with parked cars on both sides. I've witnessed trucks struggling, cars speeding, and pedestrians walking in the street from downtown and almost getting hit. So I really do hope there is some kind of a traffic study for the safety of response vehicles. I hope that property can be revitalized in a way that makes sense for everyone while preserving the value of my home and my fellow neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess my comment would be on that is generally on the street itself and the difficulty navigating the street is something, I don't know if you've taken it up with the borough, with the mayor and council, but that's something that basically they would be the ones to direct those types of questions and challenges to, not this board can only study what's being proposed in front of it, this particular application. And so if the street is unsafe, I think that was something you should raise with the mayor and council. I'm not sure what they can do about it. If they turn it one way, I don't think you're going to be happy either. So, you know, it's a tough one.
I made a note of it. I'm also on the Public Safety Committee and with Chief Dillon, Sergeant Griffith, and the council members who are on the Public Safety Committee. We have our first meeting Tuesday of the month, every month. I'll make sure it's on the May agenda.
Okay. Thanks.
Make sure that we have requested the stop sign to be added at the corner of Maple and Elm Street for years. That is the request.
Okay.
It's never got to me, so, but I don't make the final decision.
Right. Okay. Any other members, excuse me, of the public?
Mr. Chairman, I will
have
include
comment?
that comment to my email to Chief Dillon and the Public Safety Committee.
Okay. Thanks, Ron.
Ellen Maples, across from Richie's mom's house. Okay.
Okay. Nothing else from the public. I'll bring it back to the board. And Mr. Kelly, if you would sum up.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Thanks to the board for the time and their attention that they've shown on this. I understand and I've heard everybody's concerns. This site has sat fallow for a while. My clients had it for 16 months and it was fallow before that. In terms of trying to develop the site, you heard from Mr. DiDio, who really put a lot of effort into trying to come up with something that not only complies, but that's going to have a positive impact. He's investing in the community. This is currently a dilapidated, decrepit site. It begs for redevelopment. And you have an individual or a group of individuals who have invested in the borough looking to redevelop it. But they're not looking to be a greedy redeveloper throwing up 60 units in a place where it doesn't belong. They initially proposed 6 and then looking at it, thought about it and said, you know what, we could do this with 4. They've come up with an application that is truly a transitional resolution to what is a very difficult site. I mean, the complete shape of it is what is really a short flag lot. It's a reverse flag lot, is the quintessential example you get in Cox or in law school or any kind of planning course about a bulk variance. Coupled with that, we have non-parallel lines on the site, which are a challenge. And coupled with that, you have what I believe was probably a zone that was imposed to accommodate what was already there. Regardless of how the bank got there with the drive up, I'm not really privy to that. That's what you have. And this was put in the C1 zone because of it. It's a difficult site to develop because there's a parking lot right next to it. And as both the planner and my other experts have alluded to, it really is not on the main street, which is the purpose of the C1, is to be enhanced. So it's off that. And I understand there's other similar pre-existing conditions that may suffer from the same anomaly, but we're just talking about this site for the purposes of this evening. My expert in terms of planning was very clear, and I believe your planner has agreed that the positive and negatives, there's evidence here that those are met to warrant the use variance. The biggest positive that this is going to pose is the fact that what's being proposed is much less of an impact than what could be allowed. And what's even more of a challenge is the fact that to put a single family or a 2-family, as we learned tonight, still requires a use variance. I mean, this is really a challenging site to redevelop, but it calls out for redevelopment. What my client has done is propose something that meets the positive and negative criteria necessary for a use variance. It's specially situated to this use. It's a transition. They've gone to great lengths to bring it more into conformity or more Allendale-y, or Allendaleized, to adopt Mike's term, with the neighborhood. And they didn't do that lightly. This is going to be a great expense, and they want it to succeed. They want this to be a good project. I understand there have been other applications for apartments in the C1. And my planner was, I think, very convincing to my ears when she said, you know, if this was on Maple, this would be a different story. I'm sorry, it's on Maple. If it was on the cross street, Allendale Avenue, it would be a different story. She wouldn't make that argument. I don't think that this application is invading the C1 zone with apartments. That's not the intention of this. This is intended on a really anomalous site that you don't have anywhere else in the C1 to come up with a use that's not going to adversely impact the neighborhood. And that is actually a transition that kind of brings your master plan, the state goals of planning into fruition in a better manner than what is proposed. Put aside the economics of it. I'm not going to argue the economics of it. The board's not supposed to consider that. But in terms of the positive and negative, this poses a much less intense impact than what is permitted. You know, the trip counts that Mr. Simoff recited in light of the complaints of the neighbors on a site that's going to get developed, whether it's my client or somebody else, it's not going to remain fallow. Property in Bergen County is not going to remain fallow. I'm surprised it's remained fallow for this long. It's dilapidated, it's being cleaned up, and it's going to be a much more intense use if you approve what's allowable. So I believe my client has done everything the board has requested. We've stipulated to all the conditions. We agree to be bound by all the conditions that were recited during the course of testimony. I believe that this is a good application for the borough. It's a good use. It is a transition. It meets the positive and negative criteria. It's going to improve a drainage situation that's currently apparently a challenge over there. And it's still going to carry through the benefits of the streetscape. So it's not going to be like we're cutting this out so it doesn't look consistent with what's going on. Based upon that, we would ask the board to look favorably on the application and approve it as submitted, subject to all the stipulations we've agreed to. So thank you.
Thank you. Next steps or resolutions or
Well, we could,
debate?
you could, the board should consider it in terms of their own deliberations tonight. And you can vote on it tonight, or you can, next meeting. I can go over the criteria for the use variances, although the planning testimony, I think, was pretty thorough in terms of that. And,
Right.
Mr. Snikes has touched upon that at length in his report. There's only one other variance required, requested, and that is the side yard, that would be rear yard.
Rear yard, yeah.
Which is a C variance, as you've heard testimony about. So the only two variances up for consideration by the board would be the use variance and the C variance for the rear yard. They have different criteria, but I think the
Right.
board has heard the criteria from both the applicant's planner as well as our borough planner. All the conditions that we have documented, if there was a resolution of approval, would be included in the resolution of approval. Since this is a use variance, there is a heightened standard of approval, which means that 5 members must vote affirmatively in order for the use variance to be passed. That is, if there are any other questions of me in terms of the legal requirements, I'm certainly open to answer anything that you need.
Thanks, Chris.
That's question.
Are the alternates voting?
The alternates are voting. They are all here for the previous testimony and the testimony. And since the other members are not here, we will have a full complement of 7 members voting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the explanation. My personal view is that we should vote tonight and not hold off any longer. We've done, I think we've done due diligence here. We've heard the testimony, we've heard the neighbors as well, so I think we should move to, and we're not at our cutoff point, so I think we can move forward. This evening. Anybody have any other views of that? I'd like to hear them.
I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, we should vote tonight.
Okay. So next steps in order to move it tonight is,
Well, if somebody would want to make a motion for approval or a motion for denial,
right,
it would be up to a board member to make it and then second it and then discussion and then vote on that resolution.
Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion?
Hi, I will make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a second. Okay, we have some discussion on the motion. Before we move to a vote, any commentaries from anyone?
I feel like the burden of proof of the hardship
The variance a lot is very strange and it is an eyesore right now in the town. It's been that way for a long time. I think this would look, this is the best use for this property at this point. I don't see a better solution here.
Right.
That is proposed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I will agree with Patty Sandra, as well as, I hope you can hear me. The applicant has shown during his testimony willing to compromise, agree to all our requests and take in consideration some of the residents' concerns. And I agree, I think it's the best use. We can't expect this owner or any other owner to have a vacant property to pay taxes on something that does look important, not what we would like to have here in Allendale. And I think it's a lease of the uses. I mean, he could put a store that an apartment upstairs that would probably create more traffic and more issues without any approval. So I think the applicant did his due diligence. I think they're his experts for his direction, took our concerns into consideration, and as you know, gave us a final plan that I think the residents going to wind up liking when it's done.
To echo Mr. Kistner's comments, again, I appreciate Mr. Kelly and your experts working to accommodate the comments from the board. Again, we're looking at something, at least from my perspective today, it's not been used. It's not been used in several years. It's a dilapidated structure, and this would certainly be an improvement. And considering what could be put there, I believe that this is the less intense use, given the unique characteristics of the property.
Yeah, I worry about the loss of the commercial space and the commercial sort of continuation, if you will, off of Allendale Ave. But the reality of today's environment is that there's not a, commercial retail space is probably not going to be all that, and the size of the property would limit the amount of retail space that you could put there, and particularly the parking around it. So this is a transition and a transitional sort of area. I think they've presented a good case that with only somewhat of a limit to 4 units, with 8 cars and 8 spaces, they met the RSIS requirements. So I think, and they have been willing to work with us throughout both evenings of testimony in terms of making changes to the plan to make it more in keeping with the town of Allendale and the borough we all love, and to try to make it fit better into that space and the neighboring properties as well. And certainly I guess that you could have pushed it even higher to the limits of the height, as some people have tried to do recently. So we respect, or we appreciate that, you've kind of pushed it down, not down, but I mean, in keeping with the properties that are there on Maple, which tend to be taller properties. They're older homes with pretty tall clearances in terms from ground to top of roof. So that's kind of where I am on it. Anybody else before we move?
I can't add much more to anything you guys have said, so. It's a transition property. It's been sitting vacant. It's an eyesore. And what else could be done? Retail, I think if the retail was to go in there, would we then have a problem with vacant store space? Because the applicant would have a hard time leasing that property for whatever.
We have some vacant store
And we have
space.
it already. And we have a situation right now. Traffic considerations, believe me, I take that personally and heartedly for reasons I won't discuss here. But I'm not thrilled with the 8 spaces, but it meets everything because I still say 2 per. It's I'm looking at the lawyer. It's not, you guys are doing everything you're supposed to do. Okay. But 8 + 1 versus 7 + 1, but we're meeting all the standards, we're meeting all of the requirements. The applicant has been very amiable to anything that we've requested so far, and is willing to continue to work. And again, I struggle with what else could go on this property other than, perhaps a house, but would have a hard time with the house or with other things that could be done with it. So Just my thought.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody else wish to comment before we move to vote? All right, then we'll move to a vote. We'll do it, I guess, by roll call.
Board Member Davis,
Yes.
Board Member Kistner,
Yes.
Board Member Yakarino,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Sariko,
Yes.
Chairman Quinn,
Yes.
alternate Forbes,
Yes.
alternate Petrino.
Yes.
Okay. All right, you are approved.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We look forward to the good project.
Thank
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Resolution approval, and we'll have it at the next meeting.
Okay, we still have a couple of matters on the agenda, so.
I will be very brief.
Yes. I'll ask you to be too.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Okay, just to round up board business here. I was not here on Monday, but there was an applicant for 109 East Orchard that will be coming back. And there was a letter received today that they want to postpone or adjourn until the June meeting. So June 15th, and not May 18th. So I just want to make all board members, and I will commit to listen to the tape, at least for that particular applicant, and so I can be eligible to hear their next iteration of this. Okay, and then Ron had some land use committee report.
She can't hear you. Linda can't hear.
Ron can, yeah, maybe. We'll just.
You can leave that there. Thank you.
Council, thanks.
Excuse me, we have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
So the land use committee met this morning, but before I start that, Linda did ask, even if we don't have enough applicants for in May, possibly can still have 2 meetings.
thank you, Linda.
The committee did meet today. Our borough engineer, Mike Freeland, brought up several resident issues, concerns that the committee gave. After Mike explained the issues, he gave me go ahead to start looking at and resolve those issues for the residents with a cost factor. Another thing we're going to look at next few meetings to amend our code so applicants and residents make it more easy to find requests for setbacks. Explain that in more detail.
The enhanced side yard setback
Right.
section is a separate section, and Anthony's been running into problems with a lot of applicants who come with.
Who don't find it.
applications that think that they comply.
Right.
And have to explain to them.
You have to look at this other section. Yeah,
so we'll
tie that
take a
back.
Simple note or two in the code we can refer
Right.
and resolve it.
This is going to be a surprise for our board attorney, Mr. Carter here. We're going to be requesting that he and myself and Mr. Vreeland meet. We're going to try to set up a standard operating procedure letter that will be able to address some residents' misconceived or ideas on how to, certain things while the borough's responsible and some things that aren't the borough's responsibility. In the years, it's been kind of a gray issue. A lot of the good old neighborhood stuff that by new state requirements and more and just cost factors, it's not fair to the residents. You're gonna have to stop. So we're gonna try to draft a standard letter so we can address these concerns and have it memorialized in writing and give the residents a better understanding why we can or can't do something.
Does that fall under the just say no letter?
I didn't say
I think that's good. There's a lot of confusion.
Yes.
And I get all kinds of
And,
stories.
you know,
like, oh,
and
the town's gonna
sometimes,
do
you
it.
know,
I'm like,
and-
"Oh,
Exactly,
no."
yeah.
And sometimes, you say no, and then that thought leads residents head in 6 or 8 months and they come back with the same thing. So we're
Right.
trying to get a more formal standard letter that we can utilize.
Exactly.
It takes a lot of time answering emails, over the same request. over and over.
And that's exactly myself. I said, I met with property maintenance, Mr. Limatola today, and same thing. Things he's addressed in the past, and we keep a pretty, Mike keeps a very good document on that. And look, we talked to you about that in 2020, sir. Just because it's trees in a right of way, we didn't plant that type of tree. It's not our tree. And it becomes
I mean,
5, 10 more
I'll
calls.
send Ron the memo that I wrote about the stop sign at Elm and Maple about 5 years ago.
Okay.
As an example.
Yep.
That wasn't something that was ignored. It was something that wasn't recommended.
Right.
Installed.
That's always good for Mr. Sergeant Griffith, always likes those, so, but thank you, that's it, I'm very thorough and brief as that could be, thank you.
Thank you. And I know we have Park and Ivy tomorrow. So Chris will let us know one way or the other.
I doubt there'll be a
Whether-
decision right away, just that knowing Judge Farrington, but I could be surprised, but I feel that we'll probably argue the motion. It's really like a oral argument, and then she'll take some time to write a decision, but we'll see.
Okay. Any other board members have any other matters to bring to the table? So 2 meetings next month?
I'm kind of used to this now.
Depends on the volume. All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.